Chapter 541. First today. As soon as Zhang Yan arrived at the Yaoying clan's famous peak, that middle-aged cultivator from the heaven-mending pavilion followed him again. He said that the various sects were discussing matters, and invited him to the alchemy peak. Omd expected this a long time ago, so he didn't refuse. After instructing Wei Zihong with a few words, he followed Wei Zihong in a carefree manner. Both of them flew at lightning speed and arrived at the top of the mountain in an instant. There was a bluestone archway with golden bells hanging on both sides, swaying in the wind and emitting a clear and melodious sound. In the middle of the archway, there was a stone staircase about 10 feet wide, leading straight up. At the end of the staircase was a gilded bronze palace that was faintly discernible in the clouds. The middle-aged cultivator cupped his head and said, "Daoist Zhang, the other Taoists are waiting up there. You can go ahead." Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and walked up the stairs to the front of the temple. The two Taoist children in front of the door bowed to him and pushed the door open. He stepped over the foot-high threshold and walked into the temple. He looked around and saw that there were more than 10 cattail hassocks in the hall. The people sitting there were filled with qi of the way, and there were clouds above their heads. When they saw him coming in, they all looked over. Ingye Daoren stood up from his seat, cupped his fists and said, "Enlightened Zhang, please take a seat for a moment. This old man and Guang Yuan's fellow Daoist Shin still have a few things to discuss." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He knew that Guang Yuan's sect was one of the great Xianmen sects 1,000 years ago, and was one of the sects that signed the Talisman Book. In the past, the disciples of Guang Yuan's sect had some conflicts with him, but he did not expect that they would also come for a sword duel this time. He turned his gaze and saw an old Taoist dressed in a bagua robe. The old Taoist looked depressed and weak. His heart couldn't help but tremble. He smiled and bowed to Ingye Daoren. After that, he walked to an empty futon and sat down. At this moment, he suddenly felt a gaze sizing him up. He looked up and saw a middle-aged cultivator with a robust body. He was also sitting at the head of the table, judging from his robe and seat. He was a disciple of Yuxiao school. As their gazes met, he could read the unfriendliness in the other's eyes. His heart skipped a beat. Not to mention the grudge between his predecessor and the Zhou family, just the fact that he was Zhou Chongju's disciple in name meant that there was no longer any room for reconciliation between him and the Zhou family. After Ingye Daoren sat down again, he cast his gaze onto the people of Guang Yuan's sect, Daoren. He asked slowly, "Elder Shen, have you thought it through?" Elder Shen was originally dispirited, but after hearing those words, his body trembled slightly. Suddenly, his eyes were filled with anger. He seemed to be extremely angry. He said in a hoarse voice, "Everyone is a great sect of the celestial sect. Why must you be so overbearing? Thousands of years ago, when our Guang Yuan sect was at its peak, when did Patriarch Shinchong ever bully our fellow Taoists like this?" Nanhua sect's disciple Nie Zhang suddenly sneered and said, "Heaven's will is constant, all things have their own ups and downs, life and death. Your Guang Yuan sect only has you, one Yuanying cultivator, here. What ability do you have to protect that talisman?" Everyone knew that Guang Yuan's sect had been under the protection of Nanhua sect for thousands of years. But this Daoren actually came to fight without saying a word. There were even disciples of other sects who thought that it was Nanhua sect who had secretly instructed him to do so. How could he give him a good attitude? Elder Shin was silent for a while, then he said in a low voice, "Daoren, I think I have some tricks up my sleeves. In order to protect this talisman, I can try my best. Even if I have to sacrifice my life, I won't hesitate." Elder Ingye shook his head and said, "Elder Shen, please forgive me for being blunt. If you don't have the help of the 10 sects, you definitely won't be able to protect that talisman. In the end, it will only benefit the Devil's sect. For the sake of the East Hua continent's celestial sect's fortune and the world's livelihood, I hope Elder Shen can look at the bigger picture and stop being so stubborn." Yang Bai of Yuanyang sect sighed and said, "Elder Shen, you also know that the devil calamity has begun. You should also know that the devil's calamity has already begun. Our Donghua mystic sect is in the midst of a great calamity. We cannot allow the disciples of the devil's doctrine to continue being so arrogant. This sword battle is to curb their power. When your Guangyuan sect's patriarch Shinchong was still alive, his name was indeed renowned throughout the 9 states. It is not that we underestimated you. Now that your sect's techniques are incomplete, what are the chances of you winning against the disciples of the devil's doctrine? Elder Shen was instantly stunned. His hands trembled slightly. It wasn't that he didn't think about this before he came, but he still had a sliver of hope in his heart. Now that Yang Bai had pointed it out, his heart sank. Daoren shouted and said, Elder Shen, why are you so stubborn? Even if you don't think for yourself, you should think for the disciples of your sect. Why do you have to risk the world's condemnation for your own selfishness? Zhang Yan watched coldly from the side. He knew that although Elder Shen was trying to persuade him, he was secretly doing it for him to see. However, he wasn't Elder Shen. It was impossible for him to give up on the talisman just because of this. The item that all the sects were fighting over was actually a treasure in the world. It was originally refined by an ancient virtuous person. It could go to the 9 heavens to collect the Qian Tian Jun Yang essence. Once a cultivator obtained this item, they could use it to ascend to the grotto heaven realm. This treasure was closely related to a scroll of talisman. Only the person who signed the talisman and obtained a law talisman could use the talisman to go to this item and obtain its essence. Tens of thousands of years ago, this scroll of talisman passed through the hands of the cultivators of Donghua continent. Thus, it led to the grand event of signing the talisman. Now that the 18 sects had arrived, it meant that 18 talismans would descend from above the clouds. If it was in the past, it would be enough to determine the winner within the Xianmen. However, now that the devil tribulation had arrived, all the sects had already agreed that they should first work together to suppress the disciples of the devil sect and try to prevent them from obtaining even a single talisman. Then, the ownership of the talisman would be decided. As for the mountain gate that suddenly appeared, to them, it was an additional variable. If they ignored it, wouldn't the disciples of the devil sect be able to obtain the talisman for no reason? Thus, they wanted to force this Elder Shen to leave behind the talisman and withdraw from the sword competition assembly. As the disciples spoke one after another, it immediately gave Elder Shen unlimited pressure. There was anger, hesitation, bewilderment, desolation, and a bit of unwillingness in his expression. However, he also knew that under the suppression of the 10 sects of the Xianmen, if he did not comply, not only would he not have a good ending, he would also implicate the Guangyuan sect. After struggling internally for a while, he said dejectedly, forget it. I'll let you guys take it. As soon as he said this, he seemed to have lost his spirit as he sat on the praying mat, paralyzed. Doran's expression relaxed slightly. If this Elder Shen was stubborn and refused, it would be a troublesome matter. After all, they were the sects of the Xianmen. They also cared about their reputation. If they could avoid fighting, it would be better not to. At least this elder knew how to appreciate favors and avoided a dispute. He cleared his throat and glanced at Zhang Yan. He was clear that this kind of method could be used to deal with Elder Shen, but it would not work on Zhang Yan. The Yaoyin clan had been declining for thousands of years, so the position of the Grand Elder was not important to them. However, Zhang Yan had another identity, which was one of the top 10 disciples of the Qinsang school, so they had to be careful. Moreover, Zhang Yan not only had 3 Yuanying cultivators guarding him, he also had a 1,000-year dragon carp that was comparable to a Yuanying level 3 cultivator. This was not something that anyone here could compare to, so they could only try to persuade him with words. Daoren put on a sincere expression and said, Spiritual Master Zhang, in this sword competition, the Xianmen will fight against the devil sect together. I hope you will understand the principle of righteousness and hand over the talisman. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, Why would the Yaoyin clan's edict be given to others? If I ask all of you to take out your sect's edict, are you willing to do so? Daoren couldn't help but feel helpless. He looked to the others for help. Just now, Hu Xian had been silent, but now he raised his head and slowly said, Although junior brother Zhang is my junior brother, he came here today using the name of the Yaoyin clan, and has nothing to do with my Qinsang school. He had already thought it through. This junior brother Zhang was very good at borrowing power. Regardless of whether he came today of his own will or if there was someone helping him from behind, as the top 10 disciples of Qinsang school, he could not be tied up by him. When Yingye Daoren heard this, he couldn't help but be shocked. Hu Xian's words had already made it clear that he would not stand on Zhang Yan's side. However, Zhang Yan smiled and stood up. Everyone, there is no need to say anything more. This edict originally belongs to the Yaoyin clan, I will never hand it over. Yingye Daoren's expression changed. Spiritual Master Zhang, do you think that with your strength alone, you can deal with the 6 sects of the devil sect? Zhang Yan sneered, a sharp light shot out from his eyes. He looked around and said loudly, there is no point in talking too much. Later on, we will use the swords in our hands to determine the result. After saying this, he swung his sleeves and left the hall. The hall was silent. Someone said, it's good to let him suffer a little. Another person mocked, this person is so rude and unreasonable. When the time comes, don't expect the Xian men to not care about friendship and be unwilling to help. Sun Huaying sneered, and he also stood up. Everyone looked at him in astonishment. He glanced at Hu Xian and said, it's a pity that fellow Taoist Zhang is not a member of my Shaoqing sect. He swung his sleeves and walked out of the hall as if there was no one around. When he reached the door, he glanced around and identified the direction, then he launched a swift sword light and escaped. But after a while, he saw Zhang Yan in front of him riding the astral wind, so he said, fellow Taoist Zhang, wait. Hearing this, Zhang Yan stopped his escape technique, turned around, and said with a smile, so it's fellow Taoist Sun. Are you also here to persuade me? Sun Huaying shook his head. He sneered and said, don't put me in the same category as those rotten things. Since the edict belongs to your Yaoyin sect, you can take it openly. If anyone doesn't want it, just kill them with your sword. Why bother with them? Zhang Yan's decayed body is still beautiful, and his legs are thin, 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 and his legs are thin. He raised his hand and said, if fellow Taoist Sun is free, why don't you come to my peak? However, Sun Huaying waved his hand and said, no need. Then he looked at Zhang Yan seriously and said solemnly, in the past, my junior brother, Ying Minchang, was trapped in the Chen clan for 7 years. Thanks to fellow Taoist Zhang's mediation, he was able to escape just now. I owe you a favor for this. If you need my help during the sword fight, just tell me. After saying that, he cupped his fists and shouted. Then, a sharp sword light flew out and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Chapter 542. Elder Shen returned to the peak with a lonely expression. He saluted the middle-aged cultivator who escorted him and pushed away the boy who came to support him. Without saying a word, he hid in the temple that had already collapsed. The middle-aged cultivator looked at him and felt sorry for him. He looked around. The peak was lifeless. Because no one had taken care of it for hundreds of years, it was overgrown with weeds and debris. It was a scene of desolation. He sighed. If senior brother Yingye hadn't ordered him to keep an eye on Elder Shen and return only after obtaining the decree, he wouldn't have stayed here for even a moment longer. He looked at the sky again. Since the sword competition had not yet begun, it was boring to stay here. He found a place to meditate by himself. Elder Shen stumbled as he walked. His disciple Jiang Yu, who had followed him to the spell assembly, happened to walk out from inside. She couldn't help but exclaim, Master, what's wrong with you? She hurried over to support him. Elder Shen shook his head and waved his sleeves, urging her to go inside. Jiang Yu's eyes were full of worry as she helped him inside. However, after entering the room, Elder Shen slowly straightened his bent back and said in an extremely calm voice, Disciple, I remember that you once saw Zhang Yan, Jinren Zhang, on the Yinsang sect's cloud-sweeping peak? Jiang Yu was surprised to find that her master had swept away the dejected look he had just now. His eyes were shining again, and there was even a hint of cunning in them. She hesitated for a moment, then bit her lip and said, "Yes, disciple met Zhang Yan not only at the etching text conference, but also at the Shui country of the Yang region." There was one more thing she didn't say. Shen Yifeng's whereabouts were unknown because he went to kill Zhang Yan. Elder Shen nodded slowly and said in a low voice, "Listen, I need you to do something. Don't let others find out." Using telepathy, he whispered a few words into Jiang Yu's ears and finally said, "Pass my words to Zhang Jinren later. No matter what he plans to do, you must report back to me truthfully." Jiang Qi was a little troubled. "The sword competition is just around the corner. I'm afraid I won't be able to make it in time. Besides, there's still that person watching outside. I'm afraid I'll be suspected if I go out." "What's so difficult about that?" Elder Shen took out 2 pieces of talisman from his sleeves and placed them in Jiang Yu's palm. He pointed at one of them and said, "This piece was left behind by Patriarch Shinchong in the past. Even though it doesn't have any supernatural powers, it can summon the wind and rain and gather lightning. If you take it and use it, no one will be able to discover it. Even if you want to use your mana to disperse it, it won't be possible. In this way, the disciples of the Celestial Sect will definitely suspect that the Devil Sect is playing tricks, and the disciples of the Devil Sect will also suspect that it is the doing of the people of the Celestial Sect. They will definitely not easily fight." He then pointed at the other piece of talisman and said, "The weather has changed. Take this invisibility talisman and go to Zhang Jinren's place. Remember, this storm will only last for an hour at most. You need to leave early and return early to prevent outsiders from finding out." Jiang Yu's eyes widened as she said, "This disciple has served Master for 100 years. How come I've never seen Master use these talisman?" Elder Shen chuckled and said, "My Guangyuan sect was a big celestial sect in the past. In any case, we do have some assets. It's just that outsiders don't know about it. Even your sect leader's senior brother might not know about some things." Jiang Qi's eyes revealed a look of determination as he said, "Master, this disciple will definitely not let you down." She used the tip of her finger to draw a line on the talisman and sent it up into the sky. The talisman turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared into the clouds without a sound. After a full quarter of an hour, just when the two of them were beginning to suspect that the talisman was useless, dark clouds suddenly gathered. Thunder and lightning crackled, and the sky darkened. A fierce wind sprang up, and in the space of a few breaths, a torrential downpour began. Elder Shen immediately relaxed. Although Ancestor Shinchang's cultivation was extremely high, he did not know if this talisman could still be used after so many years. He did not think that this senior's power was so high that it was beyond his imagination. Although this talisman had been around for thousands of years, after it was used, it could still attract lightning and summon wind and rain. He tilted his head to listen to the outside and said in a low voice, "Disciple, go ahead. Be careful on the way." Jiang Yu replied crisply and used the invisibility talisman. Her figure disappeared in a blink of an eye. Elder Shen squinted his eyes and looked outside. He had been an elder in Guangyuan sect for hundreds of years and struggled in the cracks for such a long time. How could he not know how Xianmen operated? Just now on Qingdan Peak, it was just a half-real, half-fake act. However, the hatred in it was indeed his true feelings. Because of that, he managed to fool everyone on the seats. He had already made arrangements in secret. He was certain that other than the 16 sects, there would definitely be many other sects coveting the essence of Junyang in the sky. These people did not have the imperial edict, so he could use this opportunity to win them over. He did not need to achieve the position of Grotto Heaven. He only needed to find the opportunity to break through the third level of Yuanying, go back to see the secret left behind by the ancestor and find the lost techniques. Then, Guangyuan sect would be able to rise again. On Qingdan Peak, the disciples of the various sects did not disperse. They were still discussing how to deal with the disciples of the Devil Sect. However, this sudden storm made them feel a little strange. Ingye Daoren said in surprise, "Dragon's fate, why is there a storm?" He pinched his fingers and calculated, but he could not find any clues. Someone said suspiciously, could it be the doing of the devil's sect? Daoran thought for a moment and said, it doesn't matter if it's them or not. There's nothing wrong with dispersing this storm. It's just a pity that Daoran did not bring his instrument with him. At this moment, a handsome young man stood out and said, Elder Ing, it's not difficult. Let me go up and dispel it. Everyone looked at him. This person was the disciple of Anata sect, Chen Qingping, who came for the sword battle. The disciples of this sect were best at sealing demons and casting seals to dispel evil. Daoran said cheerfully, all right, with Taoist Chen's help, this should be a piece of cake. Chen Qingping cupped his hands and bowed. The high cloud above his head shook. He rode the high wind confidently and went above the clouds. However, after a while, the storm did not show any signs of stopping. After a while, Chen Qingping walked in from outside and said in frustration, the person who cast this spell is much stronger than me. Forgive me for not being able to help. Zhou Huang snorted. He waved his sleeve and took out a spell. Then, he hit a ray of light on it. This ray of light shot up to the sky and lit up the peak of the mountain. The mountains were as bright as day. The light covered the ground and even the thousands of cultivators by the river bank were startled. However, even with such a powerful Dao technique, it still could not dispel the storm. Zhou Huang was stunned. Daoran saw that Zhou Huang also could not do anything and was surprised. He stroked his beard and said, don't act rashly. Let's wait and see. They were very cautious. The disciples of the devil's sect were also very cautious. They were afraid that this storm was caused by the disciples of Xian Men, so they sat still. Feng Haiyang looked at the sky quietly. He seemed to be lost in thought. Suddenly, he whispered, this is not something that can be done by humans. 2 hours passed quickly. Jiang Yu returned to the peak of the Guangyuan sect. After entering the inner room, she removed the invisibility talisman and bowed to Elder Shen, Master, I'm back. Elder Shen looked at her up and down. Seeing that she was not injured, he felt relieved and asked, how was the trip? Jiang Yu shook her head. Elder Shen was a little surprised. He scratched his beard and frowned. He thought to himself, this shouldn't be the case. From what I saw, Jinren Zhang is obviously a person who pursues Dao wholeheartedly. He is not a person who is afraid of danger. He has no reason to reject what I said. He thought about it a few times but still could not figure out what the problem was. However, he was not discouraged. If this path could not be taken, he would just have to change to another path. It was just a pity that the 2 talismen were dead just now. As he was thinking, a ray of light suddenly flashed past. A handsome Taoist in his 30s appeared silently in front of him. He bowed and said, greetings, Elder Shen. Elder Shen was not flustered by the sudden appearance of a person. He stood up calmly and returned the bow. He said, fellow Taoist, are you a disciple of Jinren Zhang? Taoist Su nodded to himself. This Elder Shen had some tricks up his sleeve. No wonder he could deceive everyone on Qingdan Peak. He took out a talisman from his sleeve and handed it over. He said, Jinren Zhang ordered me to come. If Elder Shen is willing to make an oath, he can lend a hand. Elder Shen took the talisman without hesitation. He tore half of it and bit his fingertip. After making an oath with his blood, he swallowed it and returned the other half to Taoist Su. He smiled and said, with Jinren Zhang's help, Daoran can be at ease. At the foothills of Chengyuan Gorge, the corpse cult's evil lady held an incense burner with green smoke in her hand. A dense mist spread out and rose into the air. It curled up like a canopy and blocked the torrential rain and strong winds from the sky. Beside her was a girl in a hibiscus gown. Her expression was cold and indifferent. This was her fellow disciple, Ding Yu. This time, she came at her invitation to think of a way to get a share of the East Hua Continent's sword duel assembly. Wu Huanchen looked up at the sky and said with a smile, this rain came at the right time. I think it will continue for another 2 hours. I don't know who did this, but it gave us a lot of time. Lady Qi asked, Hall Master Wu, when will your two close friends arrive? Wu Huanchen turned around and glanced at Ding Yu first. Although Lady Qi claimed to be her fellow disciple, there was something about this girl that he could not see through, which made him a little fearful. Thus, he took a step to the side and said, I have already said that the two of them are forging a defensive treasure. This matter concerns everyone's lives, so we cannot be careless. Therefore, they will need to come a little later. When the time comes, with your corpse cult and my Wudang spiritual hall joining hands, I think it will not be difficult to seize a talisman. Lady Qi said indifferently, there might not be many who will do it. The East Hua continent, be it the Xian men or the demonic sects, their strength cannot be underestimated. In my opinion, the remaining two sects can be considered. Chapter 543. Another 2 hours later, the clouds stopped and the rain stopped. The sky was bright and it was already 5 p.m. More than 10 rays of light dispersed from the Dan-raising peak and returned to their respective peaks. In less than half an hour, the sound of a bell rang from the peak and spread throughout the mountains. The thousands of cultivators on both sides of the river knew that when the bell rang, it meant the start of the sword competition. They all looked up at the sky excitedly. Ingye Daoren carried his horsetail whisk and walked to the altar at the peak. This was the highest point of Chengyuan Gorge. He looked around and took in all the colors of the mountains and rivers. He took out the talisman scroll and placed it on the altar. He bowed and took a few steps back. He ordered the boy to light the incense and candles. After burning half of the talisman, he moved his hand and muttered a few words before pointing at the talisman. The talisman suddenly shone brightly and trembled lightly. After a short while, he heard a sound coming from the heavens, wave after wave, like a surging tide, distant and grand. After another short moment, the dense astral clouds in the sky seemed to be stirred, and a rift was suddenly torn open. A 30,000-meter-long beam of clear light pierced through the sky and descended like a pillar. Amidst the snowflakes and starlight, a palm-sized golden talisman fluttered and slowly descended. But no one expected that the first talisman would land on the peak where the demonic sect disciples were guarding. Ingye Daoren sighed in his heart. The demonic sect was indeed at its peak, even the heavens were looking after them. Luckily, only one talisman was sent down this time. He felt slightly at ease. If there were more talismans, there would be a chaotic battle with the demonic sect disciples. This was not what he wanted. The demonic sect had always had strange spells. Now that the demonic tribulation had started, there were many new spells that they had not used for a long time. It was not good to act blindly. He should slowly fight with them and test out their strength before trying to subdue them. At this time, there was a dignified man in the demonic clouds. The handsome black-robed cultivator walked out. He first looked at the edict a few times, then turned around. He bowed to the many devil sect disciples behind him and said, I will go and take down this edict. Feng Haiyang smiled and said, I was going to ask Brother Gao for help, but I didn't expect the talisman to go to your sect. It's obvious that heaven's will is on my side. Brother Gao's trip will definitely be a success. The cultivator didn't say anything else and bowed again. He stepped on the cloud and floated down. After a while, he landed on the peak and raised his head slightly. He was just waiting for the talisman to arrive. On the Yaoyin clan's mountain peak, Zhang Boyan pointed at the devil sect cultivator and said in a deep voice, Palace Master Zhang, this person is Blood Soul sect's disciple, Gao Ruowang. In the past, this old man lost to this person. Although this person's cultivation is profound, his devil arts far surpass his peers, and his escape technique is superb. However, he rarely fights head-on with others. Usually, he tries to break through his opponent's techniques and kill them just now. If Palace Master meets him, you have to be careful. Zhang Yan nodded his head slightly. Speaking of which, he had fought with Blood Soul sect's disciples a few times, so he wasn't unfamiliar with this person. Previously, he heard from Zhang Boyan that this person was famous among the 6 demon sections. He had to take a closer look at his techniques. Ingye Daoren used his finger to point and shouted loudly on the peak, who is willing to take this edict? Huanzhen Temple's Qin Qingping just now, because he couldn't chase away the wind and rain in the sky, he felt that he had lost face. At this moment, he wanted to get back at them. His thoughts changed and he shouted, "Fellow Taoists! Allow I to go for a while." He leaped forward and his body turned into a light rainbow. He flew down before the others and headed straight for the peak where Blood Soul sect was. At this moment, the disciples on the various peaks were all paying close attention. The devil's calamity had lasted for 1,000 years. Although Xian and Demon sect had yet to make a move, there was bound to be a battle. However, for thousands of years, the disciples of the Demon sect were familiar with the Taoist techniques and supernatural powers of the 10 Xianmen sections. However, they had yet to find out the details of their opponents. Through this battle, they would be able to see something. Although Gao Ruowang was a disciple of the Demon sect, he had a good appearance. His beard fluttered, his eyebrows were long, his figure was slender, and he wore a loose robe with big sleeves. He looked like an immortal. Seeing that Qin Qingping had come over, he smiled and waved his sleeves. A gust of wind splashed out and blew away the edict that was about to land. It fell straight into the Chengyuan Gorge River. Then, he looked at him playfully, as if waiting for him to choose whether to come at him or fight for the edict. Qin Qingping only hesitated for a moment before he resisted the impulse in his heart and ignored the talisman. Instead, he pointed forward and a peachwood sword flew out from behind him. With a sudden sound, a black light flashed and swiftly slashed downwards. Gao Ruowang smiled slightly. His body suddenly became blurry. As the sword light slashed down, his entire body turned into spots of green light and shattered like a bubble. There was not a single trace left. Qin Qingping also knew a thing or two about the methods of the Blood Soul sect. How could he not see that the one he killed was just an unimportant blood soul and the real body was hiding somewhere? He formed a seal and retrieved the peachwood sword. He held it in his hand and looked left and right with extreme vigilance. He mocked, "Demon sect thieves, do they all hide like this?" He shouted a few times but did not see anyone reply. He frowned and raised his finger to his eyes. In an instant, he opened his eyes. A bright light shot out from his eyes and scanned the top of the mountain a few times. However, he still could not find any clues. In the end, he still cared about the edict and could not find Gao Ruowang's whereabouts. He did not stay here any longer and rushed down on the astral wind. After the edict floated on the river, it was blown by the river wind and moved to the shore. There were about 100 cultivators standing there. Most of them had low cultivation, and the highest was only at the clear Qi realm. One of them saw the edict floating towards him. The body of the edict was shining with golden light and there were countless mysterious patterns shining. When it was in front of him, he could not help but reach out to take it. However, just as he reached his hand, a blood light suddenly appeared and drilled into his body. In the blink of an eye, he was nailed to the ground. He could not move and could only scream. The talisman suddenly shook and left his hand, drifting in another direction. Seeing what happened to that cultivator, no one else dared to take it. They all dodged in panic as if they were avoiding the plague. At this moment, the talisman shook and a bloody light flew out from it. It made a circle in the air, but in an instant, it passed through the bodies of these people one by one. Immediately, all of them were like clay statues, unable to move. Qin Qingping happened to arrive at this moment, and when he saw what was happening, he sneered and flicked his sleeve, causing a bamboo scroll to fly out. He tossed it into the air, and with another incantation gesture, the scroll opened up. He shot a ray of green light towards the talisman and said, "Collect." The light suddenly shrank from 10 feet wide to the size of a needle. With a "chi" sound, a wisp of green smoke floated by. The spell had been broken. The edict floated to the ground. When the people saw Qin Qingping arrive, it was as if they had seen their savior. They all shouted, "Enlightened Master Qin, save us." Qin Qingping frowned. He knew that he had to find Gao Ruowang's main soul or his real body to deal with in order to break this spell. He took out a hand seal and used his Dharma eye to look around. However, after a while, he still couldn't find anything. He thought for a moment and flipped his palm. He took out a black iron star plate and held it in the crook of his arm. He shook it and the needle on it turned and immediately pointed to a direction. He looked up and looked at an empty corner. He said coldly, "So it's here. How can such a small spell be hidden from me?" He pointed his finger. Over 1,000 bamboo sticks scattered through the air, encompassing the area of several tens of feet around them before descending in unison and sinking into the earth. Every single one of them was pointing straight up into the sky, and judging from their arrangement, it was actually a restriction. He made a hand seal and there was a rumble. The bamboo sticks exploded. He then waved his sleeve and a strong wind swept away the dust. When he looked again, it was already a mess. Mud and stones were flipped over and broken branches and leaves were everywhere. Just as he was looking around, he suddenly heard cries of alarm rising and falling from behind him. Turning around to look, he couldn't help but be shocked. A cultivator had actually been blown to pieces, and his corpse was scattered all over the ground. He thought for a while and guessed that Gao Ruowang must have used a substitute spell on this person. That was why he ended up like this. The cultivators were all terrified. It was obvious that they were afraid of the same ending. Zhang Yan, who was watching the battle from the peak, saw it clearly. He said in surprise, "Is it the substitute spell?" Zhang Boyan was at a disadvantage when he fought with ancestral master Tai Heng. He had a deep memory of this spell. He nodded and said, "Yes, it is this spell. I didn't expect someone in the blood spirit to be able to practice it. I wonder where he learned it from." At this moment, a few elders of the demon sect who were hiding in the demonic clouds were also pointing and discussing. Someone said, "If Huanjin Temple's art of sealing is mastered, even supernatural Daoist spells can be suppressed. As long as we are careful not to be captured by the treasured scroll and the green bamboo book, we will be fine." Someone else said, "As long as the Daoist from Huanjin Temple has all the instruments and has the support of Xiangong, he will be a strong opponent for the Ling school. To defeat this person, we must first find a way to break his instrument." Sun Yangzi looked for a while and judged, "This person is not a match for senior apprentice brother Gao." Feng Haiyang nodded and commented, "This Qin Qingping's cultivation is not bad. Looking at his agile movements, he can easily use supernatural Daoist spells. He is not someone who would shut himself away from the world. However, there are not many who can match up to Daoist brother Gao. Even I can't say for sure that I can win. If Qin Qingping retreated earlier, he might be able to keep his life. Qin Qingping accidentally killed one person. He looked resentful, but his heart was filled with hatred. Although he knew that Gao Ruowang was hiding among them, there were at least 100 people here. As a member of the Xian men, it was impossible for him to kill all of them. His expression changed several times. He scoffed and sneered, "You demon, do you think you can control me just like that?" He conjured a spell and shook his Daoist robe. In a split second, a ferocious pie beast with a dragon's head and a horse's body flew out from the robe. It rushed to one person and opened its mouth to bite. It dragged out a blood soul and swallowed it. Then, it rushed to the next person and did the same thing. After circling around the scene, everyone was paralyzed on the ground. It was obvious that the spell was broken. The pie beast let out a roar, shook its mighty body, and returned to Qin Qingping's Daoist robe. He patted his robe as if he was brushing away the dust. He stood upright in the air and said arrogantly, "Gao Ruowang, I know that your blood soul sect is good at refining blood souls. I will destroy every blood soul you send out. Let's see how many you have for me to kill." Zhang Yan shook his head. He was experienced in fights of spells. He could see that Qin Qingping seemed to have the upper hand, but he was actually in a dangerous situation. Gao Ruowang was obviously more skilled. He avoided the strong and weak points. He only used a few blood souls that could be discarded at will to test out his opponent's methods. However, Qin Qingping still knew nothing about this enemy. If he continued to fight, the result would be obvious. P.O. 1 chapter, make up for it tomorrow. Chapter 544. Zhang Yan was not the only one who could tell that Qin Qingping was at a disadvantage. Sun Huaying, Hu Xian, Zhou Huang, and the others could tell as well. In the world, no matter what divine ability or technique it was, if one knew the depth of the technique beforehand, then one would have a way to avoid or resist it, and it was even to the extent that one could use a profound technique to restrain it. Thus, unless cultivators encountered a battle of life and death, they weren't willing to easily expose their abilities. Gao Ruowang's probing just now was precisely for the sake of finding a flaw on Qin Qingping's body. However, Qin Qingping, as one of the most talented disciples in Anata Temple, was aware of this. However, he was not afraid at all. The pie beast that was hidden on his robe was formed from the drawing of the spiritual beast drawn by the founding master. He used Anata Temple's Taoist technique to worship it every day and night. After hundreds of years, he was able to condense it. It could ward off evil and devour demons. If any evil spirit came close, it would fly out to defend itself without being ordered. It was comparable to a Xian weapon. As long as this item was not broken, he would be invincible. Due to the spells of the sect, Anata Temple had killed far more people from the demonic sects than the other 9 sections. They were also more familiar with the techniques of the Shueshua sect than the other sects, so they were very confident. After breaking the borrowing object to replace shape technique, he reached out his hand and tried to grab the talisman decree that had fallen on the ground. But right at this moment, a faint image appeared in the sky, and then it turned solid. It was actually Gao Ruowang. He grabbed the talisman and smiled at him, saying, "I can't let you take this." Qin Qingping raised his finger and wiped his eyes, activating his transcendence vision to take a look. Although this person's appearance was exactly the same as Gao Ruowang's, it was only a blood soul. However, for it to be so solid, it must have been refined for a long time, unlike the trash he had casually killed earlier. After the cultivators of the Shueshua sect entered the state of Dan, they rarely revealed their real bodies in front of others. They only attached a part of their soul to the blood spirit. Using this to roam outside, even if they were killed, their lives would not be in danger. If he reached the Yuanying stage, he would be able to send his blood soul hundreds of miles away to kill living beings and capture devils to nourish himself. Those with profound cultivation could control hundreds of blood souls with just one main soul. If they lost one, they only needed to kill one, and they would be able to make up for it in the blink of an eye. However, if he could destroy the divine soul within the main soul, he would be able to heavily injure this person. He wouldn't be able to compete with others in the short term. Thinking of this, Qin Qingping unconsciously became spirited. He raised his hand to grab a bolt of lightning and threw it over. Gao Ruowang roared with laughter as he transformed into a streak of bloody light and flew away. Because it didn't have a physical body, when it moved, it was as fast as a gust of wind. Only a bloody shadow could be seen as several bolts of astral lightning struck down. They all missed, unable to catch up at all. Qin Qingping's expression darkened. He reached into his sleeve and took out a bronze mirror. He held it above his head and pointed his finger at the mirror. Immediately, hundreds of dazzling golden lights shot out from the mirror. This mirror was also a treasure. As long as it was an intangible object, once it was illuminated by the mirror, it would be unable to move. Gao Ruowang saw that there were too many mirror lights and was unable to dodge. Just before the light arrived, he shook his body. Immediately, it scattered and turned into tens of thousands of thin and long blood threads. They twisted in the air, looking like a chaotic mess. They were densely packed and then descended. They rushed towards Qin Qingping. Qin Qingping's expression changed slightly. He recognized that these were the blood nematodes that were formed from the blood yuan technique. They could contaminate treasures and feed on flesh and blood. Even if he came into contact with a little bit of them, he wouldn't be able to block them. He quickly activated his Xian technique and activated his protective treasure light. However, he was still not at ease. At the same time, he took out a fish-shaped magical artifact and activated it. Immediately, a rainbow light rose up and surrounded his body. When the blood worms were thrown over, it was as if they were thrown into a flame. They gave off a sizzling sound and melted a few feet into the flame. Nothing. However, these blood worms seemed to be endless. They surrounded him and hissed. His vision was filled with blood red. He couldn't help but be shocked. He quickly activated his Xian technique. However, after defending for a while, he didn't see any attacks coming. He couldn't help but feel suspicious. He activated his Dharma eye and scolded, trying to trick me with a smokescreen. He patted his chest. The pie beast pounced out and roared at the sky. With a boom, the blood clouds in the sky dissipated and the world became clear again. However, when he saw the situation here, his chest felt heavy. That blood soul took advantage of the moment he was on guard and actually restrained the 100 cultivators again. It placed them in a strange position at the four corners. A blood flag was waving in the middle as if it was gathering spiritual energy. It looked like a forbidden formation. He looked at it and his expression changed. Not good. He recognized this technique as well, and it was called the blood soul form disintegration technique. It was a technique of the devil path that utilized a spirit flag as a spirit pivot and sacrificed the lives of living people to activate it. Moreover, the might of sacrificing over 100 cultivators would absolutely not make him feel good. At this time, he could choose to retreat and try to escape, but these 100 cultivators would definitely die here. Moreover, Gao Ruowang had set up this formation, so he certainly wouldn't let him escape easily. He could only release those blood nematodes just now, and that was enough to keep him in place. Even if he released the pie beast, it wouldn't necessarily be able to immediately break out. Now, the only thing he could do was to destroy the flag that was still accumulating power. He only thought for a moment and no longer hesitated. He decisively threw out a green bamboo lightning talisman. However, the blood soul suddenly pointed and a large number of spell scrolls floated out. They flew towards the bamboo talisman and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Chen Qingping recognized that it was another technique that borrowed objects to form. He couldn't help but curse, damn it. He knew that even if he used the lightning talisman again, he wouldn't be able to destroy the flag. At most, he would only be able to kill 1 or 2 people. He had no choice but to pat his chest and release the pie beast again. When the blood soul saw this beast, it suddenly shook its body. In an instant, it turned into hundreds of blood souls. They howled and took the initiative to rush towards the pie beast. The spirit beast was extremely excited and naturally did not reject any of the blood souls that came. It swallowed every blood soul that came, but as it swallowed, it gradually became distracted and deviated from its master's original intention of letting it out. Chen Qingping suddenly felt that something was wrong. In a panic, he hurriedly formed a seal and wanted to call the pie beast back. However, the blood souls kept flying towards him, causing the spirit beast to open its mouth and swallow them. As a result, it couldn't help but delay returning for a moment. At this time, the flag suddenly shook and stopped swaying. The blood soul suddenly smiled and pointed its finger. The bodies of the hundreds of cultivators trembled. With a bang, they exploded together and turned into a mist of blood. The mist then converged together to form a blood arrow. It suddenly shot out and collided with the rainbow light Chen Qingping summoned. Chen Qingping let out a muffled groan as the fish-shaped magic artifact in his hand shattered with a crack, and powder fell from the cracks between his fingers. However, the blood arrow's momentum didn't stop, and it actually pierced through the treasured light protecting his body and heavily collided with his clothes. With a poochie sound, a hole was pierced through, and the restrictions on his clothes were instantly destroyed. The pie beast had already been called back. However, because it had lost its host, it could only circle in the air. Its figure gradually dimmed. Chen Qingping was shocked. He repeatedly formed a seal and wanted to call the pie beast back. However, how could Gao Ruowang give him the chance? Under his control, the blood souls kept rushing over and colliding with his protective light. He had no time to pay attention to them. After a dozen breaths, the pie beast wailed and finally dissipated. Seeing this scene, the hundreds of blood souls laughed in unison, their voices shaking the surroundings. Then they stopped laughing and suddenly flew up like arrows, turning into hundreds of blood shadows, rushing towards Chen Qingping from all directions. Chen Qingping's face was pale. He understood that after he lost the pie beast, he could no longer resist such an attack. If he didn't admit defeat, his body and soul would definitely be swallowed by this great enemy. He suddenly laughed and said, "Gao Ruowang, how can I let you do as you wish?" He smiled sadly. He took out a sparkling jade token from his bosom. Demon Sealing Sacrificial Ritual. On the peak of the Inata temple, a tall and handsome young man suddenly exclaimed, "Senior brother, you can't." But it was already too late. Chen Qingping shouted loudly and tossed the jade token into the air. A dazzling golden light burst out and flashed again. It actually forcefully pulled the 100+ blood souls into it, and with a clear cry, it stopped moving and fell to the ground. Chen Qingping saw that it just so happened to fall in front of the imperial decree. His expression showed slight regret. He tilted his head slightly, as if he wanted to take another look at his fellow disciples, but he had only turned halfway when a gust of wind blew over, and his entire body had already turned into dust and was blown away. The few elders of the demonic doctrine who were watching the battle from the demonic cloud were all shocked. Not to mention the power of the demon sealing seal, it was actually so fast when it was activated. They had never heard of it before. If they were there, they wouldn't be able to avoid it. They were secretly vigilant. If they were to force the disciples of Inata temple into a dead end, they must be careful. If Gao Ruowang's real body wasn't far away and he only used the blood souls to fight, he would probably be sealed too. The 4 Yuanying elders of Inata temple looked at each other and shook their heads. If Chen Qingping admitted defeat in front of everyone, they would have a reason to attack and wouldn't end up like this. However, this disciple was stubborn and would rather break than bend. He had a deep hatred for demons and would rather sacrifice his own life than cower in the slightest. An elder looked at the young man who was standing at the edge of the cliff and comforted him. "Apprentice nephew Umoai, before this sword battle, apprentice nephew Chen had already placed a strand of his soul in the Hall of Ancestors. It won't be destroyed." The young man shook his head and sighed, "It's just a strand of his soul. Senior brother will never come back." The elder kept quiet. On the Qingdan peak, Daoren Yingye looked normal. Although one person was lost, he wasn't worried. Other than Yao Yin and Guang Yuan, there were a total of 21 disciples from the 10 sects of Xianmen. The demonic doctrine only had 6 people. Comparing the number of people, they had the upper hand. It wouldn't be a big deal even if they lost a few people. But as long as one person from the demonic doctrine was gone, their strength would be greatly reduced. He calculated in his heart that Gao Ruowang had lost at least 100 blood souls in the battle just now. One of them seemed to be the main soul that had been refined for a long time. He was afraid that he had lost a lot of strength. It was not possible for him to fight again. Therefore, the overall situation was extremely beneficial to the Xianmen. Just as he was thinking, a ray of light suddenly flew down from the peak of Pingde's sect and flew towards the place where the talisman was. Chapter 545. This beam of light flew forward until it landed at the foot of the mountain. Those who recognized this person could tell that the person from Pingde's sect was Wu Hansheng. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. Ever since the sect master ordered him to shut himself in Zhaoyu Heavenly Lake, he did not pay attention to the matters of Pingde's sect. He did not expect this person to step into the Yuanying realm in just a few years. Thinking about it, it was because of perfected Qin's help. However, Wu Hansheng had only been in the Yuanying realm for a short period of time. Wasn't it a little arrogant for him to rush to the sword competition now? Then, he thought about it and felt relieved. Others might be like this, but it was not applicable to the disciples of Pingde's sect. As long as a disciple of this sect could invite a powerful Dharma spirit to possess them, their magic power and divine abilities would not lose to others by much. Wu Hansheng arrived at the place where the sword competition took place, but he was not in a hurry to pick up the decree. Instead, he carefully circled the place once or twice, and after confirming that there was nothing strange, he reached out to take it. However, at this moment, less than 3 feet away from the decree, there was a sudden ripple in the atmosphere. Wu Hanqing immediately revealed a vigilant expression. He retracted his hand and retreated, only stopping after he was hundreds of feet away. A figure slowly walked out of the void. His beard reached his chest, and he looked like an immortal. He smiled at him and said, "Does this fellow Taoist also want to test who is better?" Wu Hanqing exclaimed softly, "Gao Ruowang." Gao Ruowang smiled and bowed, saying in a clear voice, "Yes, it is I." Does this fellow Taoist from Pingdu's sect have any advice? Exclamations came from both sides of the river. Almost no one expected this perfected demon Dao person to appear again after defeating Qin Qingping. He did not look like he was injured at all. Wu Hanqing's expression was uncertain as he thought, the spells and divine abilities of Shueshua sect's disciples are all related to the blood spirits. Fellow Taoist Qin captured more than 100 of this person's blood spirits. Logically speaking, his strength should have decreased greatly. Does he still dare to make things difficult for me? Although Gao Ruowang and Qin Qingping fought fiercely, they did not reveal their true strength. The methods they used were still those that Shueshua sect disciples knew of in the past. It was just that he had used it more skillfully. Furthermore, this person's real body had never appeared before. Without confidence, Wu Hanqing did not want to fight with this person so quickly. But he was already here. If he were to retreat with his tail between his legs, not only would he be ridiculed by his fellow Taoists, but he was also unwilling to do so. Gao Ruowang had a calm expression on his face. However, he ignored him and grabbed the decree on the ground. Then, he bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist, if you don't attack, please forgive me for taking my leave." With that, he leaped up. He turned into a blood-red beam of light and shot into the sky. Wu Hanqing had been hesitant at first, but now that he had retreated without a fight, he suddenly understood. How could he let it go? He slapped the back of his head and a beam of light shot up. A silver ring with white light wrapped around it flew out and chased after the blood shadow. At the same time, he leaped up with the wind and flew over. Gao Ruowang looked back and smiled. With a gentle shake of his body, a blood cloud burst out from the top of his head. Then, he tore it to the left and right, and it actually split into two. One of the two blood-red hands reached down and grabbed the silver ring, while the other suddenly expanded to several hundred zhang in size, blocking out the sky and the sun. 5 fingers spread out, parting the clouds and pressing down on Wu Hanqing with a rumbling sound. Wu Hanqing saw him use this mystical ability and could not help but be shocked. He said, "Could this be his real body?" He hurriedly executed his escape technique and swiftly retreated. After drifting 100 zhang away, he was still unable to avoid it. He hastily executed a technique to bend his body and abruptly changed his direction. Only then was he able to escape from between the bloody fingers. After going far away, he held the escape light and stared at Gao Ruowang's figure. He thought to himself, Gao Ruowang is actually fighting with his real body. If my guess is not wrong, just now, Qin Qingping has almost taken care of his blood soul. Just now, he has no choice but to do this. Since that is the case, I can't let him go. I have to take this opportunity to kill him. At this moment, the spectating disciples on the various peaks also became spirited. They all looked over with rapt attention. They had the same thought as Wu Hanqing. Gao Ruowang was forced to use his real body. He must have suffered great losses in the battle just now. If they could get rid of this person in one go, the Xian Gate's chances of winning this sword competition would greatly increase. After Wu Hanqing made up his mind, he raised his head and shouted, "I want to see whether your blood soul is stronger or my Dharma spirit is stronger." After he entered the state of Yuanying, he was bestowed a Dharma spirit by the sect. It was the Dharma spirit that elder who used. It was one of the 18 city masters of the sect, and its name was Spiritual Lord Huacheng. Pingdu sect valued seniority. Originally, with his qualifications when he first entered the state of Yuanying, it was not his turn to control this Dharma spirit. However, after Elder who was killed by Zhang Yan, no one could take over this Dharma spirit. Chapter 282, Spiritual Lord Huachin. Coincidentally, the sect chose him to compete in the sword competition. Hence, it was an advantage for him. He pinched a spell and chanted an incantation. Suddenly, a mighty golden-armored deity that was about 10 feet tall appeared beside him. He held a golden whip in one hand and a precious pearl in the other. He was fully armored and looked extremely strong. As soon as the golden-armored deity appeared, Wu Hanqing suddenly leaped and merged with him. Then, he shouted and propped up his huge body. Pingdu sect's Dharma spirit was divided into the art of manifesting God and the art of enslaving God. If it was refined for a long time, it would be the person controlling the Dharma spirit. As long as the Dharma spirit knew spells and Tao formulas, it would be proficient in them. However, he had not reached this level yet. His cultivation was also shallow, so he could only use the Dharma spirit to fight against the enemy. However, if he could not suppress it, it would be inevitable that the Dharma spirit would turn against him. Not only would he suffer considerable damage, but his Tao foundation might also be shaken. Therefore, he did not dare to fight for a long time. He leaped into the sky and spat at Gao Ruowang. Immediately, smoke and strong wind rolled over. This was originally just a Dan Qi, but with the Dharma spirit, it turned into a Dan Qi fire. Gao Ruowang smiled faintly. With a light tap of his foot, he turned into a bloody red light. Like a light smoke, he actually dodged the attack first. The fire shot down and landed on the mountain ridge. Everywhere it passed, the ground was scorched, the grass withered, the trees burned, and the leaves burned. Everything turned red. The golden-armored deity that Wu Hanqing transformed into looked at the bloody light and shouted, "Where do you think you're going?" He made a move with his huge body, and in an instant, a pillar of golden light rushed out. With a loud bang, he chased after Gao Ruowang. Gao Ruowang did not seem to have the intention to fight with him. He only controlled the conveyance light to fly left and right of the mountain, and he did not look back. At this moment, Wu Hanqing only felt that his whole body was full of mana. He chased after Gao Ruowang, and he did not stop roaring. He continuously released thunder and lightning, which caused the mountains to collapse and the plants to break. The cultivators who were watching the battle thought about what happened to those people just now, and they all screamed and ran away. After all, Wu Hanqing's conveyance technique was not good enough. After chasing for the time of an incense stick, he still could not close the distance between them. In addition, Gao Ruowang purposely went to places where there were many people, which made his hands and feet tied. He suddenly felt impatient, and he waved his sleeve and shouted, "Disperse." As his sleeve waved, a strong wind immediately spun. Under the angry attack of the Yuanying cultivators, those cultivators could not resist at all, and in the blink of an eye, they were blown tens of miles away. Those with higher cultivation were better off, and they stabilized themselves after a distance, but those who did not know how to fly ended up in a terrible state. All of them had broken bones and tendons, and they were on the verge of death. Wu Hanqing chased for a full hour, and suddenly, he felt a lack of qi in his chest. He could not help but be shocked. He thought for a while, and then he knew what was going on. He looked up at Gao Ruowang a few times, and he still could not catch up to him. There was no need to continue fighting. He snorted, and actually turned around and left. Gao Ruowang saw that he was no longer chasing, and stopped in front of him. Facing the howling mountain wind, he pressed down on his beard and smiled, "You are leaving just like that?" When Wu Hanqing heard this, not only did he not turn around, but he also sped up his escape. That rampage just now, although he seemed to have extraordinary power, the consumption of his Fa was not small. In addition, his heart was gradually filled with a tyrannical aura, and he was afraid that he would not be able to suppress the Dharma spirit. His mind was still clear, and he knew that if this continued, it would be a small matter if the situation was difficult to deal with, but if he lost his life, that would not be good. It would be better to take advantage of the situation and leave as soon as possible. Gao Ruowang smiled indifferently, and did not chase. He stood in the air with his hands behind his back, and watched him leave. Although he also wanted to let Wu Hanqing live, this person was not like Qin Qingping. If he was forced, he would definitely admit defeat, and the elders of the sect would come to save him. Since he could not kill this person for the time being, and he had the decree, then there was no need to waste his energy. He turned around and flew towards the demonic clouds in the sky. Many of the Xian Gate disciples on the peak, seeing that this battle had ended angrily, could not help but feel disappointed, and shook their heads repeatedly. Gao Ruowang arrived in front of the demonic clouds, and a Blood Soul sect elder came over, and asked in confusion, "Junior brother Gao, why did you not take this person's life?" Gao Ruowang smiled, and said, "I do not care about Wu Hansheng, I just need to intimidate him a little, and then think of a way to retreat. If it was Sun Huaying, Hu Xian, Zhou Huang, or Zhang Yan, I would not mind fighting with them." Sun Yangzi's bright eyes looked over, and she asked with concern, "Senior brother Gao, did you lose in your battle with Qin Qingping?" Gao Ruowang turned to look at her, and the smile on his face did not change, and he said without hiding anything, "Sun Yangzi guessed correctly." Sun Yangzi could not help but be stunned. She had originally said this to test him, but seeing Gao Ruowang's calm appearance, she could not guess whether he was speaking the truth or not. Feng Haiyang smiled, and said to a gentle and refined young Daoist on his left, "Daoist brother Gao has fought 2 consecutive battles, and should not be tired. Junior brother Yan, when the talisman flies over, we can only work hard." That young Daoist bowed, and said, "Since senior brother Feng has spoken, let this little brother go for the next battle." On towering Pill Peak, Yadaoren saw that the first talisman was taken by the devil sect, and he secretly sighed in pity. He calmly stood up from the praying mat, and slowly walked in front of the spell altar. He ordered a child to light up the incense sticks, and then he bowed to the talisman book again. However, after a moment, a loud sound came from the sky, and then the clouds split open, and a silver light fell down like a waterfall, shining on the peak, as if the floating clouds were piled up with snow, and it was bright white. Yadaoren looked up, and saw that this time, there were 3 talismans floating down. One was going towards his home, one was going towards the direction of Li Mountain sect, and the last one was going towards the peak of Guangyuan sect. Chapter 546. Yadaoren watched as the golden talisman gradually floated towards him. He remembered that his junior was still in Guangyuan sect's territory and there was no one else around, so he had to make a move himself. He flung his horsetail whisk and flew up into the air. Just as he was about to reach for the talisman, he suddenly felt something was amiss. From the corner of his eye, he saw a red light flying towards him. He retracted his hand and calmly used his horsetail whisk to block the red light. Only then did he realize that it was a small and exquisite vermilion arrow. Sun Yangzi put down his vermilion phoenix light bow and turned around, "Senior Yan, if you don't make a move, the talisman will be taken by the celestial sect. Junior sister, don't worry, they won't be able to take it." A young and handsome Taoist walked out from the demonic cloud. He was not in a hurry to go forward, but instead carefully observed for a while. Then, his body shook and after a loud sound, a black banner rose from behind him. The banner was 16 feet long and wide. There was a half moon on the banner and 16 stars on the outside. There were fish swimming in the sun, flying insects in the moon, and beasts hidden in the stars. They were all lively, howling endlessly as if they were about to jump out from the banner. His expression was calm as he lightly made a hand sign. The stars on the banner suddenly shone and 3 beasts opened their huge mouths and spat out 3 balls of black wind. 3 people appeared on the ground. After they stood up, they bowed to the young Taoist and without any instructions, they rode the astral wind and rushed towards the 3 directions where the talisman fell. The one who walked towards Qing Dan Peak was a tall and sturdy man with thick hair and a horn on his head. He wore a bright armor and held a long golden axe in his hands. At a glance, it was obvious that he was a Yao cultivator who cultivated in the path of strength. Yadaoren did not look down on this person just because he was a Yao cultivator. He slowly made a hand sign and the astral cloud above his head spun, releasing a protective light that looked like a cloud. At the same time, he waved his sleeves and a bright light flashed. An embroidered banner flew out and unfurled in the wind. Immediately, pieces of auspicious light flew out. In the blink of an eye, the distance between the two of them had shrunk to less than 100 feet. The Yao cultivator suddenly let out a loud roar and leaped forward. He raised his golden axe high up and chopped downwards. At the same time, the auspicious light below also rose up, but the Yao cultivator felt as if he had hit the water. He hurriedly took a step back, retracted his axe, and chopped down once more. Ingye Daoren had the longest lifespan among the disciples of the 10 sections. He was exceptionally shrewd. He didn't seek to make mistakes, but he hoped to avoid them. He didn't even look at the edict that floated down. Instead, he calmly activated his mana. The high cloud above his head spun rapidly, forming an incomparably tight defense around him. The demon cultivator swung his axe again and again. Although he could always cut the auspicious light into pieces, every time he raised his axe again, that light would be mended up again, leaving no gaps for him to slip through. Over at the Lishan sect, a Yuanying elder was initially very calm. However, when he saw the banner that appeared from the demonic clouds, his expression changed drastically. He reminded Chao Minru, who was about to step forward, "Junior sister Chao, the person who will be fighting this time is that Zhuling sect's Yan Huixin. In these 100 years, he has killed countless disciples of the 3 western sections. Many of our fellow disciples have had their bodies taken away by this person's demonic arts. Junior sister, you have to be careful. You have to guard your spirit well and not give him any chance to take advantage of you." The 3 western sects referred to the Lishan sect, Pingde sect, and Huanjin sect. Because these 3 sects were located to the west of Donghua and were the weakest among the 10 great Xianying sects, their disciples would often work together to protect each other when they went out. They were often called by the same name. As for the Zhuling sect, they were also located to the west and would often have conflicts with these 3 sections. Hence, they were all familiar with the highly skilled disciples of the other sections. And this Yan Huixin was someone who was extremely famous. He had fought with the disciples of the 3 western sects many times and had never lost. Chao Minru was shocked as well. The cultivators of the Zhuling sect were good at taking the bodies of others for their own use. The scariest thing was that many of those who were enslaved did not lose their consciousness and memories. It was as if they were willing to be controlled by them. It was truly strange. She could not help but nod her head cautiously. "Junior sister will remember." She knew her own capabilities very well. When the decree floated down, she did not rush to receive it. Instead, she purposely lagged behind, waiting for Ingye and Daoren to connect with one of them before she flew out on the astral winds. She went up the cloud and saw a woman with a veil on her face coming from afar. Looking at that graceful figure, she seemed a little familiar. When she neared, that woman's eyes suddenly widened, revealing a look of surprise. She took off her veil and revealed an incomparably beautiful face, saying, "Junior sister, why are you here?" Chao Minru's body trembled as she covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Senior sister Luo, it's you." She then suddenly felt that something was wrong and retreated a few steps, saying warily, "You are not senior sister Luo." That woman shook her head and said, "Minru, do you remember when you entered the sect when you were only 3 or 4 years old? You were so lively and active. You accidentally consumed a cinnabar cold pill and your life was hanging by a thread. It was I who flew for 6 sleepless nights to pick a fire pear from the South Sea for you. Do you remember when you were 14 years old, you met a snake demon while picking a cinnabar fruit and fell off a cliff? It was I who saved you. Do you remember?" As Chao Minru listened to her recount past events, tears welled up in her eyes and her hands started to tremble uncontrollably. Although she knew that this person in front of her was no longer from the same sect, the fighting spirit in her heart was fading bit by bit. On top of the Guangyuan sect's mountain, the middle-aged cultivator saw a talisman flying towards him and was overjoyed. However, he was not very willing to fight against a disciple of the Devil sect. He lowered his head and thought for a moment before turning around to look at Elder Shen. Seeing that he was sitting there without moving, he pointed to the sky and said, "Elder Shen, why aren't you going to get the talisman?" In terms of pure cultivation level, Elder Shen was a cultivator of the second layer of Yuanying and had 3 clouds above his head, which made him stronger than him. Only by ordering him to block Yan Huixin would he be able to take the talisman and escape. However, Elder Shen shook his head and said, "This is no longer an item of our sect. How can I take it for someone else?" The middle-aged cultivator said righteously, "Elder Shen, you are wrong. This talisman is still your Guangyuan sect's. It won't be too late to offer it to us after you get it." Elder Shen was still unwilling and said, "Just now on the Qingdan Peak, Mastering reminded me again and again not to be greedy and not to touch this item. Otherwise, why would he send you here? Wouldn't it be better for me to take Daoren and give it to him later?" The middle-aged cultivator was speechless. However, fighting with others was not his forte. He had seen what happened to Qin Qingping. Each disciple of the Devil's sect was harder to deal with than the last. That Yan Huixin was even more powerful. He had to go and provoke him. Looking up to the sky, he saw that the Taoist who came down from the banner was already flying over. If he didn't make a move now, the talisman would be taken away. He said anxiously, "Elder Shen, why are you being so reasonable? If I want you to go, then go. Stop talking nonsense." Helplessness appeared on Elder Shen's face. He raised his hand and bowed, saying, "Doran's cultivation level is shallow. His techniques are not as good as the disciples of the other sections. If you insist on me going and the talisman is taken away, don't blame Daoren for me." At this moment, the middle-aged cultivator only begged him to make a move. He thought to himself, "If you go and make a move, will you still be able to do anything?" Thus, he nodded firmly and said seriously, "Don't worry, Elder Shen. If that's really the case, it's not your fault. I will explain it to my senior brother. I won't make things difficult for you." Elder Shen seemed to agree reluctantly. He made a hand seal and activated his escape art. He turned into a rainbow and soared into the sky. At this moment, 5 rays of light climbed up from the north of the river bank and flew toward the peak of Guangyuan sect. This shocked the middle-aged cultivator. He was not sure who would intervene at this time. It was Wu Huanchen and his group. Together with the 2 deputy hall masters of the Wudang Spiritual Hall and the 2 senior and junior sisters of the corpse cult, there were a total of 5 Yuanying enlightened masters. They had long set their eyes on the talisman of Guangyuan sect and had been waiting for an opportunity to make a move. Seeing that the talisman had landed, they rushed out without hesitation. Wu Huanchen stepped on the astral wind and rushed to the front with the mountain-quaking golden staff in his hand. He made a gesture, and Qin Yangzi and her junior sister went to face the demonic spirit that had its body seized. The 2 deputy hall masters of the Wudang Spiritual Hall stood behind him to protect him, faintly guarding against the others. When the middle-aged cultivator saw this, he could not help but exclaim, "Oh no!" When Elder Shen saw 5 Yuanying enlightened masters coming out of nowhere, he was slightly surprised, but he quickly regained his composure. He picked up a talisman with 2 fingers and threw it out with a shake of his hand. The moment the talisman left his hand, it suddenly turned into a streak of golden sword qi and rushed toward Wu Huanchen. Wu Huanchen's eyes widened in anger. He shouted and raised the mountain-quaking golden staff. He suddenly swung it down and collided with the golden talisman. With a thunderous rumble, his body trembled, and he rolled twice in the air from the huge force from the talisman. After he stabilized his body, he was also extremely shocked. He originally thought that this old Taoist was from the Guangyuan sect, and other than having a higher cultivation, he did not have any powerful abilities. But now, how could a casual strike from him have such power? Elder Shen took advantage of this gap to fly forward and catch the talisman without a hitch. With a flash of brilliance, the talisman turned back, and he still held it with 2 fingers. He looked at it and saw that its luster had dimmed slightly. The 3 astral clouds above it spun rapidly, and the talisman shone with golden light again. Wu Huanchen came to a sudden realization. It turned out that this talisman could only be used again after it had been used once. Seeing that the talisman had fallen into the old man's hands, how could he be polite? He stepped on the cloud and rushed forward with his staff. Elder Shen narrowed his eyes, but at this moment, he did something unexpected. He shook his hand and threw the talisman at the middle-aged cultivator. He shouted, "Fellow Taoist, catch it!" His action immediately attracted everyone's attention. Without the talisman, Wu Huanchen did not have the leisure to tangle with Elder Shen. He pointed his staff at the middle-aged cultivator and shouted to the two vice-temple masters, "The two of you, come with me to snatch the talisman." The middle-aged cultivator cursed inwardly. Under such circumstances, how could he dare to catch the talisman? He rolled his eyes and blew at the sky. The talisman was lifted by the cyclone, and it spun in the air before swiftly rising into the sky. Wu Huanchen was overjoyed when he saw the middle-aged cultivator give up. Just as he was about to grab the talisman, he suddenly heard a shocking sword cry. His heart trembled, and he turned to look. He saw a brilliant sword light rushing up from Yaoyin Sek's mountain. It streaked across the sky like a star, heading straight for him. Chapter 547. As the sword light flew over, it gave off an aura as if it was piercing through the sky, causing everyone present to be in a slight daze. When Wu Huanchen returned to his senses, he was both shocked and fearful. He did not expect Zhang Yan to fight for the talisman as well. If he had known earlier, he would have looked for another opportunity. However, the arrow was already knocked on the bowstring, so it was impossible for him to retreat now. He pointed in the direction of the sword light and shouted, "Fellow Taoists, quickly go and stop him. I'll go get the talisman." The two Wudang Spiritual Hall's deputy temple masters looked at each other and rode a strong wind to the left and right to meet the sword light. Qin Yangzi fought with the demonic spirit for a while and felt that she could not defeat him, but it was more than enough to protect herself. She was afraid that the two deputy temple masters were not Zhang Yan's match, so she said to her junior sister, "Ding Yu, junior sister Yu, I'll handle this. You go and help the two Taoists." Ding Yu responded and jumped out of the battle circle, following the two deputy temple masters to face Zhang Yan. Wu Huanchen knew how powerful Zhang Yan was, but he was slightly relieved when he saw the three deputy temple masters going to stop him. He quickly turned around and rushed toward the talisman. As long as he obtained the talisman, he would definitely be able to force his way out with the protection of the protective treasure he refined earlier. A mocking expression appeared on Elder Shen's face. How could he allow this person to take the talismans so easily? With a single thought, three talismans that were shrouded in brilliant light and enshrouded in dense spiritual qi floated out from the top of his head. He pointed his hand upwards, and the three talismans began to spin rapidly. Wu Huanchen was astonished. These three talismans were extremely sharp, and every one of them was not inferior to the previous talisman. If they were to strike him, they would be enough to cut him into pieces. He could not ignore them, so he had to stop and use the divine weapon in his hand to push them away. The middle-aged cultivator's eyes flickered. Everyone was being held back by their opponents, and no one was going to get the talisman. If he went forward now, he would most likely succeed. He glanced left and right a few times. Then, he stealthily summoned the astral wind and abruptly leaped up. He turned into a beam of green light and soared into the sky. In just a moment, he arrived in front of the talisman and grabbed it. Seeing that he had succeeded so easily, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. He didn't dare to stay here for long and hurriedly flew toward Pill-Bearing Peak. Sun Yangzi, who was watching the battle from above the demonic clouds, frowned. Seeming to be unable to bear the sight of his sneaky actions, she grunted lightly before picking up the vermilion phoenix bow and drawing the bow and arrow towards his back. After a short while, her jade-like fingers loosened. Amidst the twang of the bowstring, a streak of red light shot through the air. The middle-aged cultivator suddenly felt that something was off, but before he could react, the treasure light on his body suddenly cracked and dispersed, and he felt as if someone had pushed him fiercely from behind. He staggered forward and almost fell off the cloud. He steadied the light. He turned around and recognized that it was Sun Yangzi who had plotted against him. He clapped his hand, and the jade pendant hanging at his waist flashed. A green light surrounded his body, and after glaring fiercely at the woman, he continued to fly in the direction of Butian Pavilion. Even though Elder Shen was fighting Wu Huanchen, he relied on his superior cultivation, so he still had time to pay attention to the battle situation. The corner of his eyes shifted, and he saw the middle-aged cultivator run away with the talisman. He sneered and waved his hand, and the 3 talisman cards were withdrawn. When Wu Huanchen saw that the talisman had been taken away, he was already anxious and didn't want to be entangled with Elder Shen here. Seeing that Elder Shen took the initiative to withdraw, he didn't have the heart to stay any longer. He put away his rod and rode a beam of light to chase after the middle-aged cultivator. He cultivated the path of strength, and even though he was good at escaping, according to common sense, he definitely wouldn't be able to catch up to the middle-aged cultivator. However, Sun Yangzi's arrow just now had unintentionally helped him, and caused him to be slightly delayed, allowing him to catch up. When he caught up to the middle-aged cultivator, he raised the divine weapon in his hand and swung it down on his back without any trace of politeness. He poured an unknown amount of strength into this strike, and it broke through the atmosphere with a loud bang. It whistled through the air, and before the rod even arrived, its sound had already reached the target. The middle-aged cultivator was alarmed, and he didn't dare to take it head-on. He quickly turned around, and his palm held a fist-sized, sparkling, and translucent pearl. As soon as this item saw the light of day, it released a water-like silver splendor, and completely covered his entire body. The mountain-quaking rod fell down, and it struck the silver radiance right on the spot. There was a sudden explosion, and the silver radiance immediately scattered in all directions. The pearl in the middle-aged cultivator's hand had already shattered into powder, and it rustled as it fell. Wu Huanchen also suffered from the recoil, and he was pushed back several dozen feet. After he stabilized his body with difficulty, he took a deep breath, raised his divine weapon, and leaped forward. When the middle-aged cultivator saw that Wu Huanchen was charging at him fiercely, he quickly took out a jade cup, and with a light flick of his wrist, a soft white light about 3 feet wide rose up. It slowly fell down and coiled around his body. He took a moment to look back, and he was already not far from towering Pill Peak. As long as he seized the talisman and returned to the peak, there would be an elder to protect him, and he would have nothing to worry about. However, in this split second of distraction, Wu Huanchen had already advanced again, and with a single swing of his rod, the white light faded. The middle-aged cultivator was worthy of being a replenishing pavilion disciple. Although his cultivation was lacking, he had protective magic tools, and he relied on a layer of protective treasure light to protect himself. He calmly took out another talisman from his sleeve, and just as he was about to shake it, a red radiance flew over from above the demonic cloud, and in a split second, it shattered his protective treasure light. His body was also struck by it, and he couldn't help but lean to the side. He was greatly alarmed, and he knew that this was a matter of life and death. Only a split second was enough to determine life and death. He forcefully suppressed the discomfort in his chest, and he suddenly activated the talisman in his hand, releasing a thick cloud of qi to block in front of him. When Wu Huanchen saw that the protective treasure light had been shattered, leaving only a layer of qi enveloping his body, his gaze sharpened, and he immediately felt that his opportunity had come. With a loud shout, the mountain-quaking staff in his hands suddenly shone with a golden light, and it ruthlessly smashed onto the cloud. After a loud bang, it scattered the cloud, and the staff's momentum didn't stop there. It struck the middle-aged cultivator's head, and in a split second, it was smashed into pieces. After Wu Huanchen killed the man, his gaze swept across the area, and he saw that the talisman was almost within reach. He was delighted, and he stretched out his hand to grab it. Suddenly, he heard the light sound of a bowstring on the cloud. He snorted, but he didn't dodge. He let the incoming arrow land on his back with a clang, but his body only leaned forward a little, and his movements didn't change. Seeing that he was about to grab the talisman in his hand, a look of joy appeared on his face. Elder Shen saw everything, so he naturally wouldn't let him succeed. He secretly made a hand seal, and a glittering golden talisman flew over, bringing the talisman far away. Wu Huanchen stretched out his hand, but to his surprise, he grabbed nothing. He suddenly turned around, and with bloodshot eyes, he roared, "It's you again, Daoren." Every time, it was Elder Shen who came out to ruin things at the crucial moment. He truly hated him to the extreme, and he knew that if he didn't take care of this person, it would be difficult to obtain the talisman. With a shout, he raised the mountain-quaking staff, rushed down from the cloud, and charged toward Elder Shen. At this moment, on the other side, Zhang Yan was originally heading toward the talisman, but two Yuanying cultivators suddenly flew over, one on the left and one on the right, blocking his path. He glanced at them and smiled. With a flick of his finger, a drop of Xianming heavy water flew out, and with a wave of his sleeve, a sword light was flung out, attacking the two of them. The person on the left shouted, and conforming to the norm, he took out a small jade shield to block in front of him. However, he didn't know what was going on, and he underestimated this drop of heavy water too much. With a muffled sound, his magic treasure, which was connected to his heart and blood, was smashed into pieces in the air. That wasn't all. The water's momentum didn't dissipate, and it smashed straight onto his body, smashing his shoulder and head into a pulp. A Yuanying enlightened master died before he could even release his protective treasure light. The cultivator on the right was much more careful, and he took out his magic treasure and protective treasure light at the same time. However, when he saw the sword light flying over as fast as lightning, it arrived in front of him in an instant. He hurriedly controlled his magic treasure to block it, but the sword light made a turn in the air, bypassing his magic treasure, and entered through the gap. This person was shocked, and he didn't panic. He desperately controlled his magic treasure to protect himself. However, the sword light was extremely fast. After making 3 turns, it had already killed its way into the inner circle, leaving the magic treasure far behind. In an instant, it flashed past him, and directly struck the protective treasure light. In an instant, a crack was formed, but the sword light was obstructed, and it didn't break through. Before this person had time to rejoice, the sword light suddenly shook, and another ray of light split from it. He only saw a blur in front of him, and with a poochie sound, the head of the 6 suns had already flown into the sky. Just now, corpse cult's Dingyu had arrived, but when she saw 2 headless corpses, she was greatly frightened. Just as she was hesitating whether or not to step forward, she suddenly saw a sword light turn in the air, flying towards her. She couldn't help but be shocked, and with a shake of her hand, she threw out a streamer. On the streamer, there was a bright star smoke rising, and it was very beautiful. When the sword light came, it was only 1 ray, but when it was within 200 feet of her, it suddenly turned into 9 swords, and they circled around each other continuously. Under the sword light, she felt a chill all over her body, as if her whole body was full of openings. She hurriedly used her streamer to defend herself. However, the sword light moved left and right, separating and combining, changing constantly. Every time it flew towards her, she was extremely nervous and did not know how to defend herself. She could only use all her strength to activate her protective light to defend herself. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and the 5-colored strong cloud above his head spun, and a ray of fire flew out from his back. In just a flash, Dingyu's protective light was stripped away. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. A ray of light seemed to come from the sky, and with a sweep of her neck, it had already taken away her head. The headless corpse paused for a moment, and then fell from the clouds. Qin Yangzi watched helplessly as her fellow disciple died in front of her. Her mind was in a mess, and she cried out in grief, "Junior sister." Zhang Yan seemed to have not heard her. He looked up at the sky, and with a wave of his sleeve, he used the minor heavens shifting escape technique. In an instant, he crossed a distance of 100 feet, and arrived in front of the decree. At this moment, a strange sound was suddenly heard, and a fierce red ray flew out from the sky, shooting straight towards them. He did not even look at it. The 5-colored strong cloud above his head spun, and a ray of watercolored light rose from his back. With a rush, the vermilion arrow disappeared without a trace. When Sun Yangzi, who was on the devil cloud, saw this scene, her expression changed greatly. Zhang Yan raised his hand, and took the decree into his hand. Then, he turned around, and calmly returned to the peak. From the time he used his sword to leave the peak, to the time he took the decree and left, it only took him a short moment. However, in this short moment, he had already killed 3 Yuanying spiritual masters. The cultivators in Chengyuan Gorge, regardless of whether it was the Xian sect or the Devil sect, were all shocked when they saw this scene. At this moment, as they watched him leave, no one dared to stop him. Chapter 548. On top of the clouds, Yan Huixin watched as Zhang Yan calmly took the talisman and left. He looked at his back with caution and thought to himself, this Zhang Yan is indeed a great enemy of our generation, but now is not the time to fight him. Lady Qi was terrified when she saw her junior sister, Ding Yu, get killed. Her junior sister's innate talents were not ordinary. Not only was her cultivation not inferior to hers, but she also cultivated a powerful divine ability in the sect. However, all of this was useless against Zhang Yan. The flying sword was so fast that Ding Yu did not have the time to use that divine ability even after he was killed. The devil spirit that was fighting Qi Nyangzi had the appearance of an imposing man. Even though his body had been seized, his eyes were still clear and he hadn't lost his mind. At this moment, when he saw that she was distracted, how could he be polite? He immediately seized the opportunity and shot out several bolts of lightning, all of which struck the protective light around her body. Even though it didn't break, it still shook her chest to the point where she almost vomited blood. At this point, Lady Qi no longer had any intention to fight. She swallowed the salty taste in her mouth and retreated to the east, disappearing in a flash. The demon spirit did not chase after her. After obtaining Yan Huixin, he turned around and ran towards towering Pill Peak. Just now, Wu Huanchen saw Zhang Yan barge in and killed 3 people in a blink of an eye. He was terrified, but fortunately, Zhang Yan seemed to have no intention of causing trouble for him. He took the talisman and left immediately. Wu Huanchen could not help but feel lucky. He did not want to stay here any longer. Because he was in a hurry to escape, he crazily struck Elder Shen over 100 times with his rod. Elder Shen did not have any intention of fighting him to the death. He rode a breeze and flew far away. After Wu Huanchen forced Elder Shen back, he put away his rod and leaped into the air, fleeing toward the Chengyuan Canyon's entrance in a streak of light. However, he had just killed a Yuanying cultivator from Butian Pavilion. The 10 sects would not let him escape so easily. A Yuanying elder from the Heaven Mending Pavilion had already arrived at the top of Raising Dan Peak. He first took out a piece of jade stone and placed it in his hand to receive the origin spirit of the middle-aged cultivator that was floating in the air. Soon after, he coldly snorted. His sleeves stirred up a gust of astral wind as he chased in the direction he fled. Wu Huanchen had only traveled a few miles when he suddenly heard the cry of a bird in the sky. When he turned his head to look, he discovered that it was a monstrous bird with snowy feathers that was approaching him. On its back stood an old Taoist with white hair and a beard. The old Taoist was looking at him coldly. At this time, another ray of green light shone down from the peak of Taihao School. A Daoran man with a solemn expression appeared and shouted, "You killed a disciple of my celestial sect of wonders, how can I allow you to escape? Why aren't you obediently being captured? If you wait for this old man to make a move, I'll make sure your body and soul are destroyed." These 3 people all had astral clouds above their heads. It was obvious that they were cultivators of the 2nd layer of Yuanying. Wu Huanchen's heart trembled when he saw this. He let out a wild roar and waved his hand. A treasured light scuttled out from his bosom. It was a treasured umbrella. There were over 1,000 pearls embedded on the umbrella's surface. In an instant, they emitted thousands of spiritual lights. It was so dazzling that everyone who was looking over was dazzled. The 3 Yuanying elders were also slightly absent-minded, but they recovered in the blink of an eye. Seeing that he wasn't willing to give up without a fight, they each took out a magic treasure and attacked him. The 3 treasures fell together, and the treasured umbrella was shaken by the sparks. Rays of light shot out, and over 100 of those pearls shattered in an instant. However, Wu Huanchen's magic treasure was originally prepared to be used to escape after seizing the talisman. Its defense was unbelievably strong, and he actually withstood the joint attacks of the elders of the 3 sects and charged out. He finally got out of Chengyuan Gorge with great difficulty. He was afraid that the 10 sects would still not let him go, so he flew with all his might. He only slowed down when he saw that he could no longer see the 3 elders behind him. He looked at the treasured umbrella in his hand again and saw that over half of the pearls had been shattered into powder. The remaining ones were also dull and full of cracks. This meant that the treasure had been completely destroyed. He had spent close to 100 years on these ocean jade pearls. He had slowly accumulated them, but they were all destroyed today. It was truly heart-wrenching. Compared to this, the failure to seize the talisman made him even more dispirited. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh toward the sky, and he continued forward dejectedly. After walking for 2 hours, he saw a handsome purple-robed cultivator with long eyebrows and starry eyes hovering in midair. Above his head were 2 masses of astral clouds, and there was a woman standing behind him. When Wu Huanchen saw the woman clearly, he was shocked and thought to himself, Lady Qi. Didn't she escape before me? Why is she here? The young Taoist's sharp gaze swept over him, and he nodded. Not bad. You have some cultivation. I'm lacking people to serve me. Are you willing to come? Wu Huanchen was stunned, but he quickly reacted. He grabbed the mountain-quaking rod and said angrily, Who are you? How dare you treat me like a servant? The young Taoist smiled and said, I'm Luo Canghai. Although I'm not famous, I'm sure you know my uncle. Wu Huanchen could tell that this person seemed to have some background, so he probed, May I know who your uncle is? Luo Canghai said proudly, My uncle's surname is Luo, and his name is Mengzi. Wu Huanchen was shocked. He had naturally heard of the North Underworld continent's Python tribe's chief, Luo Mengzi. He quickly cupped his fists and bowed, saying fearfully, So you're a relative of Demon Lord Luo. Forgive me for my lack of manners. Luo Canghai was rather satisfied with his respectful attitude. He said, I'm going to Chengyuan Gorge to seize a talisman, but I'm still lacking a few helpers. Lady Qi has already agreed to follow me, are you willing to come with me? Wu Huanchen's head was drenched in cold sweat. He had just now escaped from Chengyuan Gorge. If he returned, wouldn't he be walking right into a trap? His eyes flickered, and he wanted to retreat. Lady Qi suddenly said, Hall Master Wu, my pitiful junior sister and the 2 vice hall masters of your Wudang spiritual hall were all killed by Zhang Yan. Are you not going to avenge such a great enmity? Just now, fellow Taoist Luo has promised me that as long as the 2 of us help you, we'll be willing to deal with this person. Wu Huanchen cursed in his heart, Is this woman crazy? That Zhang Yan is so powerful, but she's willing to send herself to her death, and she's going to drag me down with her. However, Lady Qi was persuading him on the surface, but she was actually telling him that Luo Canghai already knew his background. If he didn't comply, even if he could escape, he could come looking for trouble. Luo Canghai smiled faintly and said, Hall Master Wu, if I'm not wrong, you also have the bloodline of my Python clan, and you're cultivating the strength path technique of my clan. It's just that it'll be difficult for you to advance further. If you're willing to help me, I'll give you a drop of a great demon's blood essence after everything is done. I won't go back on my word. Wu Huanchen was shocked. His grandmother was a demon cultivator, and he had never told anyone about it. He didn't expect Luo Canghai to see through him. However, that was not all. The conditions that followed made his heart palpitate. After he entered the Yuanying realm, he had indeed encountered a bottleneck in his cultivation technique, which was why he wanted to search for a talisman. If he was lucky enough to obtain some of Jun Yang's essence, he could exchange it for a few drops of Great Demon's blood essence before he could continue his cultivation. He thought to himself, since this Luo Canghai wants to order me around, he won't just sit and watch us die. However, I don't know how strong he is, but I hope he's not an arrogant person. He pondered for a while, and his expression changed several times. In the end, he clenched his teeth and cupped his fists, saying, I'm willing to help you. At this moment, at the bottom of Chengyuan Gorge's Dan-raising peak, Ying Yadaoren was no longer as calm and composed as he was just now because he was attacked by 2 demon spirits. In addition, Yan Huixin was glaring at him like a tiger watching its prey, as if he would personally make a move at any time. Not long after, he felt a wave of exhaustion. On the other side, although Chao Minru and the woman surnamed Luo also fought, she was someone who cherished old friendships. Because the woman was once from the same sect as her and had even saved her life, Chao Minru held back when they fought. Yan Huixin patiently waited for an hour. When he felt that the time was right, he stretched out his hand and waved the banner on his back. Among the 16 stars on the banner, 2 more walking beasts opened their huge mouths and spat out 3 streams of black gas. Then, 2 cultivators with different appearances appeared. Ingye Daoren saw this and threw away the talisman in his hand without hesitation. He turned around and walked away, giving up the talisman and admitting defeat. Yan Huixin did not chase after him. Up until now, this old Taoist had not been messed up, and was not someone who could be easily bullied. Moreover, the 3 nascent soul elders of the heaven-mending pavilion had come to support him, so there was no need to continue fighting. He made a grabbing motion, and that talisman was pulled over. Chao Minru saw that Ingye Daoren had retreated and sighed in disappointment. She no longer fought for the talisman and allowed him to take it away. She faintly said, "Senior Luo, if we meet again, this little sister will not show any mercy." After she finished speaking, she walked back to the peak without looking back. Old Taoist Ingye was unhappy that he had lost the talisman decree, so he returned to supporting Pill Peak with a dark face. Just as he was about to go up the altar to ask for the talisman, the elder who was already at the 2nd level of nascent soul came up to stop him and said, "Junior Martial Brother, wait a moment." This time, one of the talismans was taken by spiritual master Zhang. What he did was quite against the rules. Just go and ask him to get the talisman decree back. Ingye Daoren's spirit slightly rose and he said, "That's right. I need to go personally." He tidied up his robe and flew up with a strong wind. In a flash, he arrived in the sky above the Yaoyin clan's famous peak. He saw Zhang Yan sitting on the altar, so he lowered the cloud and took a few steps forward. He made a Dao salute and said, "Fellow Daoist Zhang, greetings." Zhang Yan stood up and returned the salute. He smiled and said, "Elder Ing, why didn't you go to offer the talisman? Why did you come to my place?" Ingye Daoren said in a deep voice, "Daoist Zhang, please forgive Daoren for being rude. There is one thing that I have to say. The talismans of each sect should be taken or discarded by the disciples of each sect. After that, the ownership of the talisman will be decided. The disciples of other sects cannot interfere. Why did fellow Daoists take it without asking and take someone else's talisman?" Zhang Yan faintly smiled and said, "If that's the case, isn't fellow Daoist Ying's junior brother taking matters into his own hands?" Ingye Daoren said with a straight face, "That's different. It's not like Daoist Zhang doesn't know that Elder Shen has already agreed to hand over the talisman of Guangyuan sect. However, because he is alone, we are afraid that the talisman will be taken away by the evildoers of the Devil sect. That's why Daoren sent his fellow disciples to help him. Please take out the talisman and return it to Elder Shen, Daoist Zhang." Zhang Yan let out a bright laugh. He spread out his sleeves and slowly sat back on the altar. He said, "There's no need for that. Before I took action, Elder Shen had already given the Guangyuan talisman to my Yaoyin clan." Chapter 549. P.S. There is still one more update today, but it will be delayed until midnight. A ray of clear light landed on the mountain peak where the heaven-mending pavilion resided. Ingye Daoren shook his sleeves, and walked out of the light with a calm face. On the spell altar, the elder from before saw him return not long after he left. His expression did not look too good, so he could not help but be astonished. He furrowed his brows and said, "Junior, what's wrong? Is Zhang Yan not willing to return the talisman?" Ingye Daoren let out a sigh, and with a bitter smile, he explained the whole story in detail. After the elder heard it, he immediately became furious, and said, "Guangyuan sect is just a small sect, how dare they do this? Is he not afraid of implicating the sect?" Previously, when he saw Elder Shen admit defeat, he felt disdain in his heart. However, he never would have thought that this person actually dared to use other methods in the dark, and secretly gave the talisman to Zhang Yan. His heart immediately gave birth to a feeling of humiliation, as if he had been tricked. Yadaoren shook his head, and said, Shen Yinfeng must have received some kind of promise from spiritual master Zhang. That's why he dared to be so unbridled. That elder immediately choked. Not to mention Zhang Yan, just now, he had consecutively killed 3 people, and displayed his incomparably tyrannical sword techniques. Just his status as one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang school was enough to make them not dare to act blindly without thinking. After all, they used their power to oppress others in an extremely rough manner. If this method no longer posed a threat, then they naturally would not be able to do anything. If the Guangyuan sect was able to rely on Qinsang school, they only needed to close their sect gate, and activate their great formation. No one would be able to do anything to them. That elder's brows were tightly locked. He slowly walked out a few steps, and seemed to be muttering to himself. After a while, he finally turned around, and said in a muffled voice, Junior, spiritual master Zhang's actions, I also cannot see through them. Let's not talk about it for now. After the sword competition is over, I will go and ask my teacher to go to Qinsang school to find out what is going on. Yadaoren sighed, and said, This is the only way. He looked up at the sky. He saw that the sky was getting dark, it was already 1/4 Wu hour. He thought that he might be able to fight another round today, so he cupped his fists toward the elder and brushed his sleeve. A cool breeze rose from the ground and sent him to the altar. He first ordered the altar boy to change the incense sticks and then tidied up his robe. Only then did he step forward to worship the talisman book. After bowing a few times, he retreated to the side and waited for the decree to arrive. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, a thunderous sound could be heard from the horizon. The sound resonated throughout the world, and the mountains responded together. The gray sky parted, and several auspicious lights broke through the surface of the clouds like a waterfall. Immediately, several mountain ridges received the auspicious light, and under the twilight, they glowed with extraordinary splendor. Yadaoren raised his head and looked up. This time, 4 talismans floated down from the sky, and 2 of them floated towards the celestial gate. Looking at the peak, one of them headed towards South Flower sect and Shaoqing sect, while the other 2 headed towards Jiuling sect and Origin Mirage sect. Shaoqing sect Sun Huaying was meditating on the peak. At this moment, he sensed something and opened his eyes, giving off a bright glow. He raised his head slightly and saw a talisman floating towards him from the sky. Without hesitation, he flew up into the sky from the peak. He went forward to take it, and successfully took it into his hands. After he kept it, he looked around and realized that no one was coming to fight him. He frowned and thought about it. He scoffed, turning into a bright sword light and charging towards Jiuling sect. Yadaoren saw this. He was instantly pumped up, and he stepped forward. His gaze followed the streak of light and he was delighted. Great, with Shaoqing sect Sun Jinren's help, we will be able to turn the tables. The demon sect had snatched a few talismans from the celestial gate. However, it wasn't to the extent of hurting them. The strategy that the celestial gate 10 sects had decided on was to kill the demon sect disciples who came to fight. The demon sect had been suppressed by the celestial gate for thousands of years, so they only had 6 disciples. They just had to kill 1 or 2 of them and head to the extreme sky. How would they have the strength to fight against the celestial gate then? When that time came, they wouldn't have to follow any rules, and the side with more people would win. Yadaoren felt that as a Shaoqing sect disciple, Sun Huaying was able to come to Chengyuan Gorge to fight, so he had to stand out from the others. He also cultivated the killing sword Dao, so it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the number 1 here. However, he didn't believe that there was anyone in the demon sect who could beat him. Yan Huixin snatched the 2 talismans, and his fighting spirit was still high. He didn't have any intention to retreat. Now that he saw the talisman descending on his peak, his expression changed and he wanted to head there. However, Just as he was about to take off, he coincidentally caught sight of Sun Huaying sprinting towards the peak of the Zhuling sect as well. His footsteps came to a halt and he stopped moving. Smiling out, he bowed his head and said, "If Reverend Sun wants to retrieve this talisman, you can take it then." With that, he actually retreated back into the demonic clouds without looking back. When the few elders of the Zhuling sect saw how he was acting, they did not seem to blame him at all. One of the elders even praised him, "Well done, junior disciple Yan. This is not a good time to clash with the Shaoqing disciples. Only after we reach the extreme heavens will we be able to compete with them." When Sun Huaying arrived at the peak where the Zhuling sect was located, he stretched out his hand and took out the talisman decree. However, even though he had easily obtained 2 talisman decrees, his gaze was cold, and there was not the slightest bit of joy on his face. Turning his head, he looked in the direction of the Origin Mirage Gate once more. At this moment, a beam of light flew up from the peak of Supreme Sky Sect and landed in front of him. Tong Yingyuan appeared and bowed to him. He said very politely, "Senior brother Sun, how about this little brother fight for this talisman decree?" Sun Huaying glanced at him and pointed downwards. There seemed to be a beam of sword light flying past. He then kept the sword pellet, flicked his sleeves, and left. Tong Yingyuan didn't know what was going on, but when he looked down, his heart palpitated. Just now, that casual sword of Sun Huaying's had actually sliced that altar made of jade into 2 without a sound. His gaze followed that sword mark and looked into the distance, and he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. That majestic temple on the peak of the mountain had also been cleanly split into 2. At this moment, on the peak of the mountain, a ray of light just happened to pass through a crack that was about an inch wide, passing through the beams and temple without any obstructions, casting onto the ground. When all the disciples of the demonic sects in the demonic clouds saw this, a deep sense of fear arose in their hearts. That temple's altar had restrictions set up on it. Ever since it was built, it hadn't been damaged even after thousands of years of wind and rain. But under the might of this sword, it was as if it was nothing more than rotten wood, unable to withstand a single blow. When Sun Yangzi saw that Sun Huaying had left and wasn't going to fight with her for the Origin Mirage Gate's decree, she felt slightly more at ease. Her eyes flickered, and she stepped on the jade Ganoderma, floating in front of Feng Haiyang. She bowed and said, "Senior brother Feng, I'm going to guard my sect's decree." Feng Haiyang nodded and said, "Junior sister Su, that Taihao School's Tong Yingyuan's cultivation is deep, and his cultivation is even higher than yours. You have to be careful this time around. Our 6 sects don't have as many disciples as Xian's sect, and we can't afford to lose even a single person. If you see that the situation isn't good, you should retreat as soon as possible. There's no need to fight for a moment's pride." Sun Yangzi restrained herself and said, "I'll remember senior brother's words." After another bow, she stepped on the jade Ganoderma and used her escape technique, flying towards the peak where her Origin Mirage Gate was located. Feng Haiyang looked left and right, smiling, "We can't let go of the Nanhua sect's decree. Fellow Taoists, who's interested in getting it?" At this moment, a sweet and pleasant voice that couldn't be distinguished from a man's or a woman's came from behind, "I'm willing to go." Feng Haiyang turned his head and saw that the person's facial muscles were stiff, and his skin was waxy yellow. He wore a white robe and a tall hat, and he was abnormally thin. There was a pale white cloud above his head that was dense with cold air, as if there was an icy mist surging around it. Feng Haiyang recognized him as Yuqi Yun of Bone Yin sect. He smiled and said, "Junior brother Yuqi has an important mission, so it's better if you don't expose your own methods." He turned his head to look at a tall cultivator not far away and said, "Junior brother Lu Muchio will go for a round." Junior brother Lu was wearing a gray Taoist robe and a pair of shoes made of light. He didn't have any accessories on him, and he wore a mask without a mouth and nose on his face. Only a pair of bright and spirited eyes were exposed. When he heard Feng Haiyang's words, he happily said, "Since senior brother Feng has spoken, I'll naturally obey." He bowed to the people around him, and as his sleeves fluttered, he casually descended from the cloud. On the peak of Nanhua sect, there were 2 handsome Taoists dressed in white sitting on praying mats. Both of them had a spirit bird crouching under their feet. They were the two brothers, Nie Zhang and Nie Gui. Seeing that there were people coming from the devil cloud, the second brother, Nie Gui, was filled with fighting spirit. He stood up and said, "Big brother, I'll go up first." Nie Zhang sat upright without moving, and said solemnly, "That person should be Lu Muqiu of Hunqing sect. It's hard to kill a disciple of this sect, Erlang needs to be careful." Nie Gui's face showed some pride, and he said, "Don't worry, big brother." He clapped his hands and the two-headed magpie under his feet immediately lowered its back. He stepped on it leisurely. The bird let out a long cry and flapped its wings. In a flash, it soared 1,000 zhang high into the sky and stopped there, waiting for Lu Muqiu to come over. When Zhang Yan saw Sun Huaying go up, he thought that there would be a good fight, and wanted to see the legendary Shaoqing killing sword. Who would have thought that Yan Huixin would come and retreat without a fight, and even when his decree was snatched away, he ignored it. He thought for a while, and saw through the devil sect's plan. This should be a strategy to avoid the strong and attack the weak, to avoid a head-on clash with the strongest cultivators of the 10 sections. With the strength that the 6 devil sects had displayed, as long as they avoided Sun Huaying, Zhou Huang, and Hu Xian, they would have a higher chance of winning against the cultivators of the other sections. Even if the 6 decrees that originally belonged to the devil sect were snatched away by the 3 of them, it would not affect the overall situation. The decrees that they lacked, they only needed to snatch back from the disciples of the other sections. Moreover, now that the devil sect had 3 decrees in their hands, another 3 would be enough for them. From this, it could be seen that in this Chengyuan Gorge, the disciples of the devil sect would not show their true strength, because they were still holding back. When they reached the extreme sky, it would be a real battle of life and death. As Zhang Yan thought about this, he suddenly thought, how would the disciples of the devil sect view him? His eyes flickered slightly. It was not difficult to test how important he was in the hearts of the disciples of the devil sect. He only needed to snatch the decree, and he would be able to see it from their response. He looked into the demonic clouds, then when there was another decree flying towards the devil sect, he might as well go forward and try. Chapter 550. Above the peak of the Nanhua sect, Lu Muqiu rode a cloud and arrived in front of Nie Gui. He politely cupped his hands and reported his name, saying a few polite words. "I'm a newcomer and have long heard of spiritual master Nie's fame. When we fight later, I hope you will show mercy." Nie Gui glanced at him and saw that although his clothes were clean and simple, his face was covered by a mask that revealed only his eyes. Frowning, he shouted, "If you go back now, I can still spare your life. Otherwise, if we fight, there will be no reason for me to stop." Different from his brother Nie Zhang's calm temperament, he had cultivated for a long time and lived for more than 400 years. His seniority in the sect was also high and he rarely met a worthy opponent, so he was full of arrogance. Lu Muqiu wasn't angry at all and put on the appearance of a junior. He cupped his hands and said humbly, "I have been entrusted by the sect and dare not retreat. I hope spiritual master Nie can forgive me." Nie Gui's eyes turned cold and said, "Seeing that you are so polite, I can let you make the first move. Don't say that I bullied you." Lu Muqiu nodded and said, "Then I won't be polite." He leaned back slightly and retreated 500 feet, putting some distance between him and Nie Gui. He then waved his hand and released a cloud of smoke from his sleeve. This fog was thick and turbid, like rolling sand and sand. In just a dozen breaths, it had stained the green jade within 1,000 feet. The tens of thousands of cultivators in the Chengyuan Gorge could only see the thick leaden cloud in the sky, but the 2 figures could no longer be seen. Not to mention them, even the vision of the cultivators watching the battle from the various peaks was mostly unable to see through it. On the peak of the Huanjin temple, the cultivator surnamed Yu raised a finger to his eye and instantly opened the Dharma eye. A light of a foot long shot out from it. Looking at it, the situation within the cloud could be seen clearly. The elder sitting at the side said with relief, "Martial nephew Yu, your attainment in the interior Huanjin Dharma eye is even better than martial nephew Chen." At this point, his expression darkened and he shook his head and sighed, saying, "It's a pity for martial nephew Chen. If it wasn't for his unyielding character, he could still be useful. With his aptitude, there are very few amongst the younger generation that can surpass him. The cultivator surnamed Yu said in a low voice, "I've heard that there's a junior sister Zhang Zhen from the Grand Transformation Grotto in Treasure Sun City. She's making rapid progress in the interior realm." The elder's eyes suddenly lit up and he nodded in agreement. "Not bad, this disciple is different from the rest. She is worthy of the 2 words young phoenix. Although no one knows the grade of her Dan, but looking at Master Pang's manner of concealing it, it should be within the top 3 grades. As the 2 of them were conversing, the cultivators from the various peaks also brought out their techniques to observe the battle. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He closed his eyes and moved his mind. A sword pill suddenly leaped out from the top of his head and emitted threads of cold starlight. This was the fusion of his mind and sword. Using the sword eye to observe the battle situation. Under this technique, the fog couldn't obstruct him. At this moment, within that ball of cloud and mist, Nie Gui's gaze could only sweep 3 feet around him. He looked around at the dusky world and sneered, "You people of the Devil's Sect really like to play these damn tricks. This method can only fool those unorthodox people. In front of me, it's not enough." He pursed his lips and suddenly let out a clear cry that resembled both an eagle and a crane. When the 2-headed magpie heard this sound, it suddenly flapped its wings and let out a cry in response. The head on the left suddenly spat out balls of clear fire. This fire flew out, dispersing the fog wherever it went. And the head on the right raised up and sucked in the air like a whale sucking in water, sucking in the rolling fog into its belly. After a dozen breaths, all the fog had been swept away and the sky became clear again. Lu Muchio's heart trembled slightly. Although he had only used a small technique, the fog had been refined from the corrosive energy that had accumulated under the sand for 1,000 years. He hadn't expected it to be broken so easily and thoroughly. The uniqueness of this spirit bird was even higher than he had imagined. The ancestor of this magpie had been found by the founder of the South Flower sect from the South Cliff continent and had been tamed using a secret technique in the sect. Because it wasn't easy to reproduce, there were only a few of them every 1,000 years. There were very few disciples who could tame it, and Nie Gui was one of them. Although this demon couldn't transform, its skills were comparable to a Yuan Yingzhenren. It had the strength to tear apart great demons and could control fire. It could be said to be extremely fierce. Lu Muchio pondered for a moment and suddenly grabbed a few bolts of hard lightning and threw them forward. Nie Gui's eyes were filled with ridicule as he said, "Just a small technique and you want to show off?" He didn't even release the protective light on his body. The magpie under his feet gave a long cry and a streak of star fire rose from its feathers. In an instant, it spread all over his body. Red light and black wind flowed and fluttered, dazzling to the eyes. When the hard lightning came within 300 feet, pieces of tinder flew out and blocked it without missing a single one. Lu Muchio thought to himself, no wonder this Nie Gui is so arrogant. He's actually not small. With this spirit bird protecting him, it's difficult to harm him with normal techniques. However, he definitely has a weakness. I need to test him slowly and find a way to find it. Although he had many remarkable techniques, when cultivators fought, they would think of a way to get their talisman within 100 feet of them before they could use their power. If the distance was a little further, even if the talisman closed in, the opponent would have enough time to react and think of a way to avoid it. After all, the magpie was a spirit bird. Its wings created wind and it flew very fast. With such a distance, even if he had a powerful talisman that could break through the fire, it wouldn't be much of a threat. Therefore, if he wanted to defeat this person, he had to find another way. Just as he was thinking, Nie Gui took out a talisman from his sleeve and threw it at his feet. The talisman cracked open and out came a 30 feet long green bird's soul essence with blue wings, white belly and brown claws. The bird was agile in its flight and as soon as it came out, it locked onto Lu Muchio and flapped its wings to attack him. Lu Muchio didn't panic. He calmly used his escape technique and turned into a faintly discernible smoke, flying around the magpie. At the same time, he patiently thought of a countermeasure. Although the green bird's soul essence chased after him, because of his extreme speed, it couldn't catch up. Nye, however, didn't chase after him. Although the Southern Flower sect rarely interacted with the disciples of the Devil sect, they knew that Hunching cult's flying technique was exceptional. Because the magpie's body was huge, it wasn't very agile. If it chased after him rashly, it would waste its mana in vain. After flying around for an hour, Lu Muchio still didn't make a move. His gaze was calm and he maintained sufficient patience. However, Nye was getting impatient. He let out a low cry, the magpie raised its two heads and flapped its wings. Suddenly, smoke and fire rose up. Up, down, left and right, within 1,000 feet, countless raging flames and black wind appeared out of thin air, densely packed like stars. This was to obstruct Lu Muchio's escape. However, there wasn't a hint of panic in his eyes. His body was like a stream of light, moving swiftly through the sky. A wisp of grayish-white smoke could be seen moving left and right, always able to avoid the cracks in the raging flames. Especially the high cloud above his head. Although it was grayish and unremarkable, it seemed to contain a slight suction force. If one looked closely, one could see circles of whirlpools revolving around him. Any scattered wind and fire that came near would be sucked into the whirlpools and disappear. Nye was slightly surprised. He looked at him seriously and raised his eyebrows. You do have some skill. Lu Muchio had only achieved yuanying for a little more than 10 years. This time, he was sent by the sect to spar with Xianmen. This wasn't a coincidence. In the internal sect competition, all the fellow disciples of the same generation as him had lost to him without exception. Among them, there was no lack of second-tier yuanying cultivators. Although it was a spar between fellow disciples, and he couldn't use many self-harming methods, it was enough to show that he wasn't ordinary. After another moment, when even the spectators below were feeling dizzy, Lu Muchio's eyes suddenly focused. He noticed that Nye had done an inconspicuous action. Nye took out a medicinal pill from his sleeve and tossed it down. One of the magpies raised its head and swallowed it. This bird usually ate 100 pythons every day. Only a sect like Nanhua sect that was good at raising spirit beasts could afford to raise it. However, once it left the sect, it could only consume medicinal pills. Once its divine ability was restricted, the vital energy in its body would be greatly consumed. It needed to be replenished with medicinal pills to prevent it from being unable to fight. A glint flashed in Lu Muchio's eyes. After thinking for a while, he put up 2 fingers and took out a spell. A long grayish-black rope immediately flew out from the high clouds above. It was like a coiling snake, and at the front was a long hook with an eagle's beak. The hook's body was wrapped in black smoke, like silk, and drifted like fire. This hook was called Desolation Chasing Hook. It took the foul air from the depths of the earth and refined fine jade sand that had been polished by wind and water for millions of years. Once it was used, it could fly several miles away and absorb spiritual aura and absorb spiritual essence. He shouted and pointed with his hand to control the magic treasure. The hook flew up and circled once in the air before suddenly descending. It struck the soul essence of the azure bird that was chasing behind him, and with just a pull, it had already been minced into pieces. Seeing him get rid of the blue bird's soul essence so easily, Nye only glanced at it casually and was completely unmoved. Instead, he was slightly happy that Lu Muchio was finally willing to make a move. If this stalemate continued, he didn't know how long the battle would last. He could only hope to get rid of this person quickly. Lu Muchio took advantage of the fact that there was nothing obstructing him. He spread his sleeves and flew up, looking down from above. He took out a spell and the desolation chasing hook let out a strange whistle. It pulled out a long black rope and attacked from 1,000 feet above. Nyegue's eyes were still filled with mockery. He allowed the fire feathers on Aok's body to block. In an instant, the desolation chasing hook surrounded him and attacked dozens of times. It seemed like this attack was futile. However, Lu Muchio wasn't impatient. He waved his hand and took back the treasure. Holding it in front of his eyes, he saw that there was a ball of spiritual aura on the hook that was hard to see with the naked eye. It was the spiritual essence that Aok had absorbed. He secretly placed his hand on it and slowly rubbed it. After a while, he absorbed it into his body. His desolate pecking hook combined with the secret techniques of the sect of chaos. When he attacked in front of the enemy, he didn't need to touch the body. Even if he just touched a bit of the aura, he could absorb a bit of spiritual essence from the body. Because this method was hard to detect, people who didn't know the ins and outs of the situation would be at a disadvantage if they came into contact with it. If the opponent's vitality was strong, absorbing some of the spiritual essence was nothing. However, he could see that this bird couldn't fight for long. During the battle, it still needed to replenish itself with pills. If he used this method 4 or 5 more times, before the opponent noticed, he would be able to absorb 30% of the spiritual bird's energy. At that time, the threat would be greatly reduced. And Nie Gui's battle power was mostly due to this spiritual bird. Once the bird was weakened, it would be much easier to deal with it. Chapter 551. While his opponent was unprepared, Lumukyu used his desolate pecking hook to snatch a few balls of essence chi. He did this very carefully. By the time Nie Gui realized something was wrong, the magpie was already dispirited, the fiery light on its feathers dimming. Nie Gui raised his eyebrows and looked. He was only slightly surprised, but there was no panic on his face. He took out a porcelain bottle from his sleeve and poured out a jade pill the size of a pigeon egg. He flicked his finger and sent it into the bird's mouth. After the bird swallowed the pill, it was slightly refreshed, but it was no longer as spirited as before. Please search for floating astronomy. After Inyadaran looked at the battle, he turned his body halfway and said to the elder sitting at the side, "What do you think, Shixiang?" The elder looked at Lumukyu, seeming to be thinking about something. After a while, he said in a low voice, "He deserves to be killed." Inyadaran nodded and picked up a seal. He wrote a few words on it with his spirit chi and sent it to the peak of the South China sect. Nie Gui looked at the flying smoke in the sky, his expression becoming more and more impatient. At this moment, his eldest brother Nie Zhang's voice suddenly sounded in his ears, "Erlang, fellow Inya just said that this Lemukyu's cultivation is not comparable to Gao Ruawang, Yan Huixin, and the others, so there is no need to hide anymore. Find a way to kill him and break an arm of the 6 demonic sects first. Please search for floating astronomy." Nie Gui's eyes sharpened and he said loudly, "You should have done this long ago." He seemed to be slightly impatient. With a loud shout, he shook his body. The astral cloud above his head spun and a golden light screen 100 zhang long appeared. It was dazzling, and the shadows of 6 ferocious strange beasts appeared one by one. They were the ape chi, swan and I, serpent, swan, shangyang, and soaring snake. These 6 beasts were all dozens of zhang long. After they appeared, they cried, roared, and hissed. Their voices traveled 1,000 li and echoed in the valley. He waved his right hand again and 8 white seals appeared from his sleeve. He raised his hand and the spirit seals of the seals disappeared, revealing 8 heavenly birds, blue swan, yellow crane, goshawk, golden eagle, white swan, red peng, vermilion bird, and black falcon. After leaving the confinement, these spirit birds spread their wings and flew into the sky. Soaring into the sky, a clear cry reverberated through the blue sky. Nie Gui flicked his left sleeve again. He also tossed out 8 black talismans. With a wave of his hand, he peeled off the talismans and 8 worms crawled out. They were the golden toad, the turtle dragon, the big turtle, the old turtle, the palace guardian, the black turtle, and the pig dragon. As soon as they appeared, the roars of bears and dragons shook the forest and shook the great swamp. Birds circled above his head. The beasts beneath his feet moved stealthily, all of them emitting brilliant light. Although the sun was setting, the sound of spiritual energy rushed into the sky. It was as bright as the sun and moon. Just now, Nie Gui had been leaning towards defense. Now that he was displaying his might, his momentum immediately shocked everyone. No one didn't turn to look at him. He stood proudly in the sky and said to Lu Muqiu, "Do you think I can't defeat you without Pang Kei's help? My Nanhua sect's profound techniques are not something your devil sect can estimate." On the peak of the Yaoyin clan, Zhang Yan's gaze flickered. The sword pellet above his head gave off a soft cry, the sword ray flickering, as if it would fly away if he wasn't careful. Many of the devil sect's elders in the demon cloud exclaimed in surprise and stood up. Someone pointed at Nie Gui and said, "The Nie brothers, if Nie Gui has such ability, then that Nie Zhang shouldn't be too far off. These two brothers definitely can't be underestimated." Feng Haiyang looked at the high cloud above Nie Gui's head and swept his gaze across the 6 strange beasts. He thought to himself, so Nie Gui has tamed these 6 worms. It was rumored that Nanhua sect had 24 kinds of superior beasts. Only Yuanying cultivators could use secret arts to raise them. The higher one's cultivation, the more strange beasts they could tame. However, with Nie Gui's cultivation of the first layer of the Yuanying realm, 6 beasts should be his limit. These strange beasts all had a lifespan of over 1,000 years, their cultivation comparable to the great Yuanying demons. They were cunning, vicious, and exceptionally brave. Furthermore, each of them had their own unique divine abilities and were extremely difficult to deal with. If one cultivated 3 layers of Dharmakaya, they could travel with 18 strange beasts. Ordinary Yuanying cultivators would find it difficult to defend against them. Although the Nie brothers were quite famous in Nanhua sect, they had never fought with others outside. Therefore, the disciples of other sects didn't know their background. Their judgment of their strength was also vague, but they didn't expect them to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat in order to not expose his methods. Nie Gui had only used his own mount to deal with Lu Muqiu. After fighting for so long, he couldn't hold himself back anymore. Even if Nie Zhang didn't tell him to get rid of Lu Muqiu, it wouldn't be long before he would use his true abilities. Yan Huixin looked back and forth. Although these strange beasts were powerful, if he knew which ones they were, he could have a way to deal with them. He thought for a moment and said, "Since we've already figured out their background, why don't we call junior apprentice brother Lu back? Right now isn't the time to fight to the death. There's no benefit in fighting too much." Feng Haiyang waved his sleeve and smiled. "No need. Junior apprentice brother Lu has always been intelligent and knows the big picture. He knows when to advance and when to retreat. He also has a way to protect himself. There's no need to worry about him. Just watch carefully." At this time, on the peak of the Origin Mirage sect, Sun Yangzi was fluttering on the clouds like a butterfly in a light veil. She continuously pulled the vermilion phoenix bow in her hand and shot out rays of red light towards Tong Yingyuan in the sky. However, every time an arrow attacked, the green jade gourd under his feet would shine with the golden light of the talisman, effortlessly blocking the arrow outside. The gourd under Tong Yingyuan's feet was the size of a small hill. From afar, it looked like a mountain hanging in the sky. His appearance was that of a handsome young man. At this moment, he was standing on the treasured gourd, the corners of his clothes fluttering in the wind. He was elegant and handsome, just like a banished immortal. Meanwhile, Sun Yangzi's figure was petite, not even a foot long. She looked abnormally tiny, and the contrast between the two of them was very strong. He didn't seem to care about Sun Yangzi at all. He stood there without any intention of making a move. He cast a glance at the red light that had once again shattered the talisman and said indifferently, "If you keep fighting like this, how can you hurt me?" Sun Yangzi blinked and put on a pitiful expression. "Spiritual Master Tong, this servant doesn't have remarkable abilities like yours. I only have a little bit of cultivation." Tong Yingyuan was about to speak when the voice of the sect's elders suddenly rang out in his mind. "Junior apprentice brother Tong, kill this woman." A bright light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Killing intent rose in his heart, and his entire aura suddenly changed. The 2 bluish-green clouds above him were originally the size of bowls, but they suddenly spun like tornadoes and shot straight up into the sky. In an instant, they expanded to the size of an acre and emitted a green light that was hundreds of meters long. It looked like there were thousands of flowers swaying within. He pointed downwards, and an item flew out from the clouds, striking towards Sun Yangzi. This item looked like a green jade pearl, and a faint purple aura seemed to be circulating within it. The treasure light around it flickered, and there was also the sound of thunder that lingered in the ears. Sun Yangzi only took a glance at it, and she felt her entire body go numb. When a demonic sect elder who was watching the battle saw this item, his expression suddenly changed. He stood up abruptly and shouted anxiously, "Not good. It's a jade jasper purple sun seed. Martial nephew, dodge quickly." Because of the agreement, the disciples of the various sects were not allowed to use true weapons during the sword battle assembly. However, in terms of profound weapons, this jade jasper purple sun seed could squeeze into the top 10 in the Donghua continent. With one strike, it was enough to kill a Yuanying cultivator. At this moment, Tong Yingyuan used this treasure without any hesitation. It was obvious that he didn't want to tangle with Sun Yangzi any longer. He wanted to quickly kill her and end this battle. Just now, Sun Yangzi didn't know how powerful this item was, and she was shocked by its thunderous sound. When she wanted to dodge, it was already a step too late. She hurriedly raised her hand and shot out a smoke net. However, the treasure seed suddenly shone with a faint purple brilliance. With a loud bang, it exploded the smoke net into dust from afar. Its momentum didn't change, and in the blink of an eye, it struck Sun Yangzi's body, instantly turning her into a pulp. With a thought, Tong Yingyuan called the treasure seed back and let it float above his head. However, there was no joy on his face. He only looked left and right, as if he was looking for something. Not far away, a faint shadow gradually solidified, and Sun Yangzi's figure reappeared. However, at this moment, there were patches of red under her fair skin, and fine beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. There was still a trace of fear in the depths of her beautiful eyes. If it weren't for the fact that she urgently used the Origin Mirage sect's wondrous technique just now, she might really have died under this treasure. Yan Huixin was also watching the battle, and at this moment, he clapped his hands and shouted, "Good." He pointed below and said with a smile, "Sun Yangzi has done a good job. I think that Tong Yingyuan's greatest technique should be this item." Taihao School's techniques were complicated, and every disciple was different. With Sun Yangzi's cultivation, it was already not easy for her to hold out against a famous cultivator like Tong Yingyuan. It was clearly a bit difficult for her to deduce his foundation. However, she didn't expect that this Taihao School disciple would actually have such a treasure in his hands. That was truly a pleasant surprise. Feng Haiyang thought for a moment, then asked with a smile, "Junior brother, how many jade jasper purple sun seeds do you think this person should have?" Yan Huixin's body trembled, and he said in shock, "Senior brother, are you saying that this person actually has more than one?" He lowered his head and thought for a moment, then said, "I heard that this item produces one fruit every 1,000 years, and one fruit produces 3 seeds. Taihao School has been established for 4,000 years, and they've obtained a total of 12 seeds. They seem to be hoping that they can use this item to suppress the 3 great sects of Xianmen. If that's really the case, they can't afford to lose even 1 seed, let alone several. Tong Yingyuan is only a Yuanying disciple. How can he be entrusted with such a task?" Feng Haiyang smiled faintly, but didn't reply. At this moment, Tong Yingyuan's expression was solemn. He held a spell in his hand, and the green cloud above his head roiled. Green wooden swords slowly rose from within, and they were all half a foot long. Lightning coiled around them, and there were actually no less than 300 of them. Jade Splendor Thunder wooden swords. Feng Haiyang's gaze focused. He recognized this sword. This treasure specialized in breaking through concealment techniques. As long as one could identify a cultivator's vital energy, they would be able to gather together. It was Sun Yangzi's nemesis. He immediately turned his head and said to an elder from the Origin Mirage Gate, "Elder Xia, quickly call junior sister Su back." He seemed to have an extremely high prestige among the 6 sections. When the elder heard him, he didn't ask for the reason and immediately summoned Sun Yangzi back. Sun Yangzi originally wanted to stall for a while longer, but she sensed something in her heart. Without any hesitation, she turned into a light smoke and floated away, returning to the devil cloud. When she left, Tong Yingyuan snorted, but didn't chase after her. He first withdrew the righteous Tao technique, then reached out and grabbed the talisman hanging on the peak. Chapter 552. Not long after Madame Su left, another wisp of smoke flew across the sky, also heading towards the direction of the demonic clouds. Lu Muqiu knew he couldn't win against Niegui, so he used the sect's magic weapon to escape from him. He also threw the decree to Nanhua sect. When Lu Muqiu arrived, he looked at the elders of Hunqing sect and bowed. He said apologetically, "I'm ashamed to have failed you." One of the elders waved his sleeve and said, "No need to be sad. It's just a decree, we can take it back later." Feng Haiyang smiled and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Lu, you don't have to blame yourself. Our 6 demonic sects are of the same breath and branch. These small setbacks are nothing. When we go to the extreme heaven, we'll still need Junior Marshal Brothers' help." 10,000 years ago, when the demonic sects were strong, there were more than 100 sections. However, under the suppression of the profound sect, those sects that stood out had already disappeared without a trace. Although there were many disagreements between the demonic sects, they were extremely united when facing a great enemy. Otherwise, they would have been completely eradicated by the profound sect in these thousands of years. Lu Muqiu nodded solemnly. He bowed and returned to his sect's cultivator formation with a reward. The 2 demonic sect disciples retreated in defeat, but the profound sect won this battle. However, Yingye Daoren and that elder didn't have the slightest bit of joy on their faces. Although they seized the decree, they didn't kill any of the 2 demonic sect disciples, which made them very dissatisfied. That elder looked at the sky and said, "It's already night. Junior Marshal Brother, let's call off the battle for today." Yingye Daoren thought for a while. 8 of the 18 decrees had been sent down today, which was almost half of the total. It seemed that they would have to decide the winner in 2 days at most. If everything went well, they might see the result tomorrow. Thus, he nodded and said, "All right, we'll do as Senior Marshal Brother says." He first took out a piece of talisman paper, then used his magic power to draw a line on it. With a swing of his sleeve, the talisman immediately flew out of his hand and flew high into the sky with a sharp whistle. After a loud noise, it turned into a ball of red flames, like a torch, illuminating the sky. This item was called Night Fire. Wherever the light reached, it had the effect of exorcising evil spirits. When dawn came, it would automatically extinguish. The old Taoist Yingye's action was not without reason. Earlier, when the Devil School's disciples arrived, they were very powerful and arrogant. Nobody knew what kind of arrangements they had made in the mountains and rivers. If a devil took the opportunity to stir up trouble in the middle of the night, it would be hard to avoid instability. Therefore, he had taken precautions in advance. Yingye Daoren called his attendant over and instructed, "Go and strike the bell." The child accepted the order and left. Not long after, the evening bell rang in Chengyuan Gorge. The disciples of various families and sects first saw the illuminating the night in the cloud, and now they heard the sound of the bell. They knew that it was time to rest for the day. Therefore, they no longer stayed on the peak, but each one of them went to their own palace hall. After activating the array formation, they sat down in meditation to restore their spirit. As for the 6 sects of the devil sect, they seemed to have the help of strange treasures. They still formed devil clouds in the sky, occupying a part of the heavenly realm. The night passed quickly. When the second day arrived, the sound of a bell rang in Chengyuan Gorge. The sun had just started to shine. In a flash, tens of thousands of feet of golden light filled the valley, cliffs, mountains, and valleys. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of cultivators, Yingye Daoren slowly walked up the altar. He pointed his beckoning dust and a child came forward to change the incense and candles. He took a few steps forward and stared at the talisman book. At this moment, he saw that under the names of the 8 sects, there were already signs flashing. This was the meaning of the talisman decree. There were 5 sects in the profound sect, namely Butian, Guangyuan, Lishan, Nanhua, and Shaoqing. The devil sect was divided into 3 sects, Yuan Yen, Jiuling, and Xuepe. Yesterday, when the disciples of the devil sect faced Sun Huaying of the Shaoqing sect, they avoided the battle. He also saw this with his own eyes and could vaguely guess what they were thinking. However, among the 10 sects of the profound sect, other than the Shaoqing sect, the most powerful sects, Qinsang and Yuxiao, had yet to make a move. The Yuanyang sect, which was second only to the 3 major sects, also did not make a move. Therefore, after pondering for a while, he felt that it would not be difficult to seize the talisman decree today. If he acted quickly, it would not be impossible to kill 1 or 2 disciples of the devil sect. After thinking for a while, he put away his thoughts and bowed to the talisman edict. Not long after, a burst of cracking sounds suddenly came from the heavy clouds, like a silver bottle breaking. In a split second, a rainbow light broke through the curtain and penetrated down. The brilliant light of the heavens accompanied by the morning sun broke into the mountains and rivers. Then, 4 auspicious clouds floated down, each containing a talisman edict shining brightly. Ingye Daoren saw that among the 4 talisman decrees, only one of them was heading towards the devil sect, which happened to be the direction of the Bian sect. The other 3 were all heading towards the Xian sect, the Pingdu, the Huanjin, and the Yuanyang sects. Since there were talisman decrees, the disciples of the 3 sects were willing to follow. Immediately, 3 rays of light soared into the sky and rushed towards the clouds. The disciple of the Pingdu sect was Wu Hanping. However, when he was in the air and before he could take the talisman decree, he suddenly felt a cold wind blowing towards him. He could not help but shiver. Without thinking, he activated his protective light. When he looked at it, his pupils shrank. He saw a demon head lying on his light, opening its mouth and biting randomly, desperately trying to drill its way in. He immediately grabbed a ray of strong thunder and struck it. In an instant, the demon head exploded into threads of black gas. However, not long after it dispersed, it merged again in the middle. In the blink of an eye, it reformed again. It let out a shrill cry, shook its body, and ran around him randomly. Wu Hanping frowned. If the demon head was here, it meant that someone from the devil sect had already made a move. However, he did not dare to be careless. He did not try to take the talisman decree by force. Instead, he paid attention to his surroundings. There were only 2 disciples from the Huanjin sect who came for the sword battle. Chen Qingping had already passed away, so only the cultivator surnamed Yu went to take the talisman decree. He had not gone far when he suddenly felt that something was wrong. His eyes flashed. He pointed at a certain spot and shouted, "Reveal yourself." A cloud of black gas suddenly appeared in the empty space. A ferocious-looking demon head tore open its mouth and was roaring madly. However, it seemed to be bound by a layer of invisible qi. No matter how it struggled, it could not break free. The cultivator surnamed Yu had a calm expression. He raised his hand and opened a jade scroll. He said, "Seal." A ray of light shot out from the jade scroll and sucked the demon head in. He then threw it into his sleeve. Although he had gotten rid of the demon head, he did not appear relaxed at all. Instead, like Wu Hanping, his expression was filled with vigilance. The demon head had only been discovered when it was within 100 feet of him. It was fortunate that only one had come. If there were more than 10 of them, he would probably be flustered. If there were dozens or hundreds of them, the result would be very difficult to predict. When Yang Bai of the Yuanyang sect saw the talisman decree fall, he turned into a sword and flew out. When he was about to reach the talisman decree, he suddenly smiled. With a flip of his wrist, a spell sword appeared in his hand. With a shout, he flew up and slashed. With a swish, the demon head hidden in the air was cut in 2. However, the devil trembled, and its body reformed. It seemed to have sensed how powerful he was, and it didn't charge forward. Instead, it floated several hundred feet away, where it let out a piercing shriek that threatened to shatter one's eardrums. At this moment, they suddenly heard the sound of waves, followed by a burst of laughter. They all raised their heads and looked in the direction of the sound. What they saw was a torrential waterfall gushing out from the depths of the demonic clouds. It was a pitch-black river with thousands of demons crying and shrieking. At this moment, a person was standing on top of the river. This person wore a yellow robe and had black hair. His sleeves were wide, and his figure was tall. Above his head were 3 clouds with strands of black fog lingering, faintly showing signs of condensing into one. Looking at the 3 clouds, the 3 people's hearts trembled. Their expressions changed slightly, and they could not help but take a few steps back, as if they were facing a great enemy. Ingye Daoren cried out in alarm, "Second layer of Yuanying?" The Butian Pavilion elder's eyelids also twitched slightly. He said in a low voice, "Last time during the sword battle, I had already heard of the name of Feng Haiyang from the Dark Spring School. However, I have never seen him before. I didn't expect his cultivation to be so high. This person is still lacking an opportunity to enter the 3rd layer of Yuanying." Ingye Daoren's face was full of worry. Although Feng Haiyang seemed to have the intention to fight the 3 of them alone, devil cultivators were good at fighting one against many. Their battle prowess was not necessarily inferior. Moreover, this person's cultivation was already superior to the disciples of the 3 sections. At this moment, he suddenly saw a white light soar from the direction of the Haiyin school. A white-robed Taoist with a tall hat flew towards the location of the talisman decree. He gathered his transcendence energy and shouted, "Fellow Taoists, who is going to go get that talisman decree?" On the summit of the Yuxiao school, Zhou Huang turned his gaze and saw that there was no movement from the Qinsang school. He thought for a while and said, "Qing Yun, since Master Hua has no intention of going, you go get the talisman decree. If that disciple of the Haiyin school is weak, you can try to kill him." Zhou Qingyun's beautiful eyes slightly moved. She bowed and said, "Yes, little sister will go now." However, just as she was about to move, she suddenly felt a tremor under her feet. Her body swayed, and she almost lost her balance. She could not help but look in astonishment. At this moment, on the altar of the Yaoyin clan's summit, Zhang Yan sat motionlessly. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and the 5-colored clouds above his head emitted a rumbling sound. Among them, a yellow vortex rushed into the air and suddenly expanded outwards. All the cultivators in the Chengyuan gorge felt that the sky darkened. Then, their vision was filled with a huge hand that covered the sky. This huge hand reached out from the summit of the Yaoyin clan and extended into the clouds. The palm slowly turned over, and in the rumbling sound, it fell towards the mountain where the Haiyin school was located. It seemed like it was going to crush them. Everyone was dumbfounded. When cultivators channeled their mana, it was rare for them to be able to go as far as 1,000 feet away. However, when Zhang Yan made his move, the huge hand came across the sky and crossed the river that was more than 50 miles wide. What kind of powerful and majestic mana was this? An elder of the Hunching sect stood up and shouted, "It's the mysterious yellow capturing 9, big hand. Junior brother Yuchi, retreat quickly." The power of the mysterious yellow capturing dragon hand depended on the cultivation base of the person who cast it. Zhang Yan's Dan was of the 1st grade. At this moment, he was accumulating his power and had the power to move mountains and move seas. When Yuchi Yun heard the voice of the elder in the sect, he did not hesitate and immediately protected his head. He turned into a white light and flew away. Not long after he left, the huge hand slammed down and smashed on the mountain peak. Immediately, there was an earth-shattering sound. Mountain rocks flew everywhere, and the grass and trees were broken. The mountain peak was in a mess. If it was not for the protection of the restriction, the entire mountain peak would have been smashed into pieces. Seeing that the huge hand turned into rolling yellow smoke, wrapped around the decree, and slowly retracted, the whole place was silent for a moment. Chapter 553. 1,000 miles away from Chengyuan Gorge, Luo Canghai was riding a 30-meter-long white python towards the gorge. Wu Huanchen and Qin Yangzi followed behind him. The 3 of them suddenly heard the rumbling echoes, and they could not help but slow down a little. Wu Huanchen listened attentively and asked in astonishment, Is it a landslide somewhere? Why is there such a huge commotion? The East Flower Sect's sword duel in Chengyuan Gorge had set up an illusory formation to prevent shocking the world. Outsiders couldn't see what was going on inside. However, Zhang Yan's move this time might have been due to his immense mana, but it disrupted the qi of heaven and earth, causing the illusory formation to dissipate for a moment. However, this gap was enough for the three of them to see what was going on inside. Wu Huanshan's mouth was agape as he saw a large yellow hand slowly withdrawing in the air. He said in disbelief, "Yellow dragon capturing hand?" He was a cultivator of the Eastern Sea, and he knew that this Taoist technique was the true legacy of the Clear Feather sect. Only the 4 great disciples under wise Master Tao could learn it. Now that it had suddenly appeared here, he thought about it and concluded that only Zhang Yan could do it. Cold sweat broke out on his back. He knew that Zhang Yan's abilities were astonishing, but to transform the yellow dragon palm into the size of a mountain, it looked like it could topple mountains and topple mountains. How dense was his mana? Even a second-layer Yuanying cultivator might not be able to match up to him. He shuddered at the thought of having to fight for the decree with such a savage person. Wu Huanshan immediately thought of retreating. He was afraid that Luo Canghai's expression would change just now, so he sneaked a few glances and saw that Luo Canghai was startled for a moment. He heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Luo Canghai did not notice him. In his heart, he began to plan even faster. Although Qin Yangzi was also shocked by the Xianhuang giant hand, there were many people with profound skills in the gorge at the moment. It was hard to tell which elder had made the move and was protecting his own disciple. Therefore, he did not think too much about it. While Luo Canghai knew of Zhang Yan's past accomplishments, the yellow dragon palm was not his trump card. It was only used to restrain others and was not valued. That day, the two of them fought. Zhang Yan also did not use this Dao technique, so he did not connect it to him. What's more, under the guidance of his senior brother, Lu Junyang, he had already refined the 4 symbols profound shuttle to the initial success level. He wasn't afraid of anyone in the same generation as him, so he naturally wouldn't take this matter seriously. After the initial shock, he calmed his mind. He lifted his foot and stomped on the ground. He stomped hard on the white python's back and said, "You lazy thing, what are you doing here? Hurry up and leave." The white python cried out in pain, stirred up the waves, and swam away. Wu Huanshan and Lady Qi looked at each other. They didn't say a word and used their escape techniques to follow. Within the Chengyuan Gorge, the yellow fog had already slowly receded. Only after it had completely receded did everyone once again see the clear sky for thousands of miles. It was already early in the morning. The mist dispersed, and the river became clear. The morning sun hung in the sky, and 10,000 rays of golden light broke through the haze and sprinkled down. Many of the cultivators in the Chengyuan Gorge felt as if they had been separated from a lifetime. Following that, many people came back to their senses, but their faces were pale. They shouted loudly and retreated from the depths of the mountain ridges like the tide. Just now, Zhang Yan's palm had scared many people out of their wits. If this strike had hit the wrong place, under the area covered by the large hand, no one would have been able to escape. They would only have ended up with their bodies crushed. It was also the first time that Zhang Yan had used his transcendence energy like this. Just now, Nie Gui and Tong Yingyuan had displayed their might, and the divine abilities and Dao techniques that they had displayed had caused people to gasp in admiration. However, under this competition of the purest transcendence energy, they paled in comparison. The yellow smoke retracted bit by bit, falling into the high clouds above. That talisman also landed in front of Zhang Yan. With a light lift of his hand, he caught the talisman decree. His eyes flashed slightly. Just now, he had purposely slowly recalled the talisman decree, but no one had come to fight him for it. This action had already tested that the Devil's Sect disciples did not want to clash with him now. Glancing at the talisman decree, he put it into his sleeve. He pondered for a moment. This was the second talisman decree that he had brought. Now that the Yaoyin clan's talisman decree had not been sent down, if he could obtain it, he would have 3 in his hands. This would probably attract the attention of many people. Before going to the extreme sky, he did not have the leisure to tangle with others, nor did he want others to see all of his methods. Therefore, if there was a change, he could only use a thunderous method to kill all the people spying on him in a short period of time to intimidate them. At this moment, Zhou Huang frowned and said, "If this person stays, he will definitely be a calamity to our Zhou clan. We must find a way to eliminate him." At this moment, he already felt that his previous deduction was not very accurate. Zhang Yan had repeatedly shown his extraordinariness. He carefully thought about it. Not to mention the juniors of his sect, even if he were to face this person, he might not be able to win for sure. This conclusion made him restless, and he wanted to immediately rush out and eliminate him. Zhou Qingyun was silent for a moment and said softly, "Even if he has some ability, but..." However, Zhou Huang interrupted her and said in a low voice, "Don't worry about this. Right now, we have a great opportunity. Just listen to my instructions later." Feng Haiyang watched as the shocking giant hand retreated. He looked in the direction of Yaoyin Peak for a moment before looking back at Wu Hancheng, the cultivator surnamed Yu, and Yang Bai. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, I believe none of you are willing to abandon the talisman decree. Then, we can only compete." On the surface, Wu Hancheng's expression was normal, but in his heart, he was annoyed and regretful. Previously, when he fought against Gao Ruowang, he was defeated and had no face to fight again. Fortunately, this time, his junior brother from the same sect who came with him had a good temperament and had no intention of fighting with him, so he was able to fight again. However, who knew that he would meet such a powerful person again? He wanted to escape, but he could not bring himself to do so right now. He thought to himself, "This person is a second Yuanian cultivator, and with 3 clouds above him, how can I fight him? I'll just fight for a few rounds and go back with some face." When he thought of this, he steeled his heart and shook his body. Gradually, the illusory image of a golden-armored celestial being that was about 100 feet tall appeared. It held a whip and a pearl, looking extremely mighty. As soon as it appeared, it merged with him and in an instant, it condensed into a solid body. The celestial opened its eyes and shouted, "Demon, see how I subdue you." Feng Haiyang looked over and smiled. "I've long heard that Pingde sect's Dharma spirit is strange. It has unfathomable abilities, so I came to try it." He flicked his sleeves. From the churning netherworld spring below their feet, hundreds of demons flew out like locusts, crying and pouncing towards the 3 of them. Most of them flew towards Wu Hancheng. The cultivator with the surname Yu was from Huanzhen Temple, and he had fought with the 6 demon sects many times. He knew how powerful these demons were, so he did not dare to fight them head-on. He immediately retreated. He flicked his hand, and hundreds of lightning talismans were shot out, landing in the group of demons. They rumbled and exploded. At the same time, he opened up a jade scroll, an array of auspicious light surrounded his body. Then, he used a protective treasure light to protect himself tightly. Even so, he was still worried. He took out a cloud and stepped on it. He turned into a rainbow and flew to a higher place, only then did he feel slightly more at ease. Yang Bai's expression was solemn, and he did not say a word. He raised his hand and shot out dozens of sharp sword gleams. He killed the hundreds of demons that flew over. In just a moment, the scattered black clouds were about to gather again. His eyes flashed, and he swung out dozens of sword gleams. He did this a few times. When the hundreds of demons appeared again, he counted carefully. There were already 1 or 2 less. He thought to himself, "It's not impossible to kill this thing." At this moment, on the peak of Yaoyin clan, Zhang Boyan came to Zhang Yan's side. He took a few glances and sneered, "That Yang Bai is just wasting his mana. How can this illusionary yin water of 10,000 spirits be broken so easily? The demons only need to roll 1 round in there, and not a single one will be missing. Unless my martial nephew is killed, there's no way to get rid of it." Zhang Yan nodded. He had heard about this technique from Zhang Boyan before. The illusionary Yin water of 10,000 spirits was one of the most powerful techniques of the Netherworld Spring sect. This water could contain a total of 9,000 demons, and it was known as the illusionary Yin water. This technique could only be practiced by Yuan cultivators. In the beginning, the cultivator could only refine 3,000 demons, and they could be controlled to eat human flesh and blood, devour vital essence, and nourish the water of tribulation. Although there were a lot of demons, it was not difficult to kill them. Ordinary profound techniques and thunder techniques could kill them. When the cultivator reached the second level of Yuanying, he could refine another 3,000 demons. At this point, the demons had already gained some intelligence. After being released, they could absorb demonic chi to nourish themselves. If one couldn't kill them in one hit, they would gather again, and they were extremely difficult to deal with. In the second level, the Netherworld River was still restricted by the cultivator's mana, so it was not too difficult to deal with. However, if one went further, he could refine another 3,000 demons. These demons were in the realm of existence and non-existence, real and illusory and real at the same time. As long as the water of tribulation did not dry up, there would be no life or death. At this point, even if the cultivator was killed, the water of tribulation would still exist. Unless one refined it with great mana, it could not be completely removed. This demonic technique was extremely difficult to cultivate. There were only a few people in the Netherworld Spring sect who had successfully cultivated it. Now that Guanfeng Haiyang had the cultivation of the second level of Yuanying, it was obvious that he had cultivated the demons to the second level. It seemed like it was easy for him to fight 1 against 3. If his cultivation improved and he became a cultivator of the third level of Yuanying, his strength would be even more shocking. While Zhang Yan and Zhang Boyan were talking, Wu Hanqin was already in danger. However, he did not escape at the first moment, and he did not have any powerful escape techniques, so he was immediately bitten by hundreds of demons that he could not kill. These demons did not let go once they were bitten. In a flash, they were all over his body. They kept biting and devouring his vital essence. Although the Jin family's immortal general did not have flesh and blood, he still needed the support of his mana. After a while, he gradually faded, as if he was going to disappear. Wu Hanqin was terrified. If his external spirit was gone, he would not be able to survive. Therefore, he shouted, "I am willing to admit." He wanted to admit defeat, but before he could finish his sentence, Spirit Sovereign Chenghua had already completely collapsed. Hundreds of demons roared and swarmed toward him. His neck was bitten by countless demons, and he instantly let out a shrill and miserable howl. Wu Hanqing's face was filled with despair. Before he lost his consciousness, he squeezed out all the energy he had left and waved his hand at Feng Hai to shoot out a shining spirit light. It was a sword in the shape of a snake. This treasure flew extremely fast. As soon as it was thrown out, it lit up the sky and pierced through the air. However, when it was only 1,000 feet away from Feng Haiyang, he smiled faintly and the tribulation water under his feet gushed out like a tide. The moment the treasure came into contact with the tribulation water, it seemed to be corroded by filth. In an instant, the spiritual light dimmed and it shook. After being hit by the water a few more times, it was full of holes. It was a tragic sight. However, it seemed like the owner's stubbornness was still there. In the end, the sword persisted and flew to Feng Haiyang. He glanced at it and casually waved his sleeve, dispersing it in the atmosphere. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.